Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Marvel World Destroyer. Chapter 1 Car Accident Scene. How am I inferior to her? Please don't leave me. A woman in her 20s hugged the thigh of a wretched man and kept crying. Her dark blue jeans were torn during the dragging process, revealing the snow-white skin underneath. Yehu, who was about to cross the road, suddenly became energetic. No matter how the mathematics on the indicator light beat, he could not stop his heart. When he saw people watching, the woman cried even louder. Yuhu, even if it's for the sake of the children. Please, don't leave us. When the elders and aunts who had originally planned to cross the street heard that there were children, they became more energetic and began to point at the man and look at him with expressions like he was a scumbag. Let go. Let me go quickly. The man roared angrily and kept shaking his thighs. Several strong men couldn't stand it anymore and slowly walked out of the crowd to surround the man. If I say this is a misunderstanding, would you believe it? Looking at the four big men with big arms and round waists, the wretched man immediately became scared. What the hell? What I hate the most is scum like you. The four big men went up and kicked and punched her. The woman took advantage of the chaos to pick up her satchel from the ground, opened it and looked at the contents. After finding that nothing was missing, she stood up and straightened her clothes. When she passed the battlefield, she exposed her long hairy legs to the wretched man. Just a kick. During the fight, a dagger fell from the wretched man, and the four strong men immediately retreated upon seeing this. Come here. Come again if you have the guts. Why are there so many things to do if you want to rob someone? Come up here. Aren't you very good at fighting? The wretched man shook his dagger and screamed hysterically. The four strong men slowly backed away. Yehu looked at the woman across the street with a dumbfounded expression and said in his heart that he was an expert. You brat, you really like to watch the fun. Hearing the man's shout, Mark looked around and found that within a few seconds of turning back, the adults and four strong men around him had disappeared. Don't run away if you dare. Let's see if I don't stab you to death, you bastard. Looking at the wretched man charging towards him with a knife, Yehu swallowed his saliva and turned around to run away. He did not expect that the flames of war would spread to him. Looking at the green light with 3 seconds left, Yehu decided to take a gamble. The wretched man stopped and looked at the indicator light and the traffic conditions around him. A trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes, but he thought of Yehu's irritating look before. There was a huge crowd of people watching, and an unknown fire arose in my heart. He threw the dagger out in anger, wanting to teach the other party a lesson. Yehu, who was running, trembled and fell on the zebra crossing, and the dagger was inserted accurately into his back. The wretched man was completely confused. He had clearly aimed at the leg, how could it be so wrong, and it was impossible for his own strength to penetrate the opponent's back with the dagger. No, no, no. It's not me. The wretched man screamed and fled the battlefield. Yehu felt that the temperature on his body was disappearing quickly. And the sound of horns around him was very harsh. Get the hell out of the way. A driver was honking his horn frantically. The lane next to him had already started moving forward, but his side was blocked. The horn behind him showed no intention of stopping. After glancing at the rearview mirror, the driver suddenly turned the steering wheel and changed lanes to leave. The driver behind him froze in place when he saw the person lying on the ground. However, the sound of the horn behind him did not stop. The driver immediately felt the sound of the horn in front of him. People's mood, after some thinking, they choose to follow the steps of their predecessors. If destroying a world allowed you to survive, would you destroy it? A voice sounded in Yehu's ears, and he felt that his field of vision suddenly broadened. He looked down at the sidewalk where his accident happened. The disembodied voice sounded again. You still have not answered my question. At this moment, Yehu seemed to be grasping the last straw, his expression became fierce, and he roared loudly. I will destroy it. Please help me. The back of a man appeared in front of Yehu's eyes. The man stood with his hands behind his back, looking like an outsider, but the words he spoke were very cold. The universe creates a batch of worlds every day. I need you to choose a world as a transfer station, go to those imagined worlds to kill the core characters, and finally destroy the transfer station you selected. Yehu's eyes flashed, and worlds emerged in his mind. Before he could answer, he heard the man's cold voice. Now I give you two choices. First, I will send your soul to the world of novels. Second, I will send your soul to the world of film and television. Can you put my soul back into my body and call me an ambulance? I think I can still save some time. Yihu swallowed his saliva and looked at the back pitifully, feeling extremely uneasy. He felt that the other party would probably be able to meet his small request. Okay young man, I didn't expect you to be so brave. You chose the most difficult Marvel universe as a transit point. Oh. I'm not. I didn't. Don't talk nonsense. When did I say I would choose Marvel? The last boy who chose DC was as brave as you. Although he is dead, his spirit lives on in you. Come on. I'm optimistic about you. After saying that, he took Yihu to the universe with one step, and took another step to reach the sky above a city. Looking at the surging crowd below, Yihu swallowed his saliva and whispered. Is this Marvel? Is it real? The planet you are on has special power. Whenever the creatures on it construct a scene in their minds, it will be reflected in the universe somewhere and gradually evolve into a complete world. The man waved his hand and a system panel appeared in front of Yihu, with his basic information and 4 options: backpack, world, contract, and mall. There is a list here. All you have to do is find the plot characters based on the above information and deal with them. After the task is completed, the system panel will swallow the world. When you accumulate enough power to destroy the Marvel world, I will satisfy you. Wish, there is my personal sponsorship for you in the backpack. Come on, young man. The next second, Yihu's consciousness began to blur. There was a falling feeling in his body. When he woke up again, he was already on the 10-meter wide bed, looking at the luxurious decoration in the bedroom. Putting his right hand quietly on his thigh, a sound of inhalation sounded in the room. Yihu excitedly looked around in the bedroom. He didn't expect that the mysterious man would be so generous and directly make himself a rich man. Ha ha ha. This set of teapots is nice. Dad will definitely like it. This vase is so beautiful. I can take it back to my mother to plant flowers. The smile on Yihu's face gradually disappeared, and he realized that he was no longer in the same world as them. To be precise, he had died on the road, and his body was probably turned into ashes by now. Chapter 2. This is too hasty, right? Dad, Mom. Yihu sat on the bedside and stared blankly at the front, picked up the quilt beside him and wiped away his tears and snot. Don't worry, your parents are doing well. An indistinct voice sounded in Yihu's heart, and then a screen appeared in front of his eyes, which was the scene of his parents watching his cremation with tears in his eyes. Mom and Dad. Yihu went down the mountain with a fierce tiger and pounced directly on the screen, and then fell a dog gnawed at the mud. The screen in front of him disappeared, and when he looked up, the screen appeared in front of him again. Yihu slowly retreated to the side of the bed, picked up the quilt and kept wiping away his tears. Looking at the mother crying and passing out in the picture, I felt a pain in my heart and regretted my behavior of onlookers. Seeing the astonishment and joy that flashed across the faces of the two when they received the medical examination report, Yihu was slightly taken aback, not understanding what was going on. Seeing that the two won the first prize in lottery tickets with the change they paid for the medical expenses, Yihu cried out in his heart, he has contributed to public welfare for so many years without even seeing a single hair. As a result, the parents seemed to be on the hook. He really wanted to ask the other party if his life affected their performance. 9 months later, the two gave birth to a baby boy, and they lived a happy life as a local tyrant. With the screen going out, Yihu's crazy heart was also there. He can no longer describe his mood in words. The previous feeling of parting from life and death disappeared in an instant. Looking at the luxurious bedroom, Yihu said in a low voice. Maybe it's not bad, everyone can live a happy life of local tyrants. After Yihu wiped away his tears with the quilt and knew that his parents were doing well, his mood gradually calmed down. It is impossible to destroy the world, even in this life. Now that his parents, Ang Kang, have become rich again, Yihu decides to spend the rest of his life in Chen Xiao's life, and he wants to beat 10 young models who massage young girls in any club. At this moment, the alarm bell on the bedside suddenly rang, disrupting his fantasy. Just after turning off the alarm clock, there was a knock on the door. Yihu frowned and opened the door with some displeasure. Mr. Yi, how do you feel? Remember to give us your feelings in writing. What? Isn't this my house? What report do you want to write? Yihu was a little confused. The waiter had a professional smile on his face, and said softly, Mr. Yi, you are really humorous. Well, let's not talk about this, I still have to inspect the house. Please cooperate. Thinking of this knot on the quilt, Yehu subconsciously wanted to block the opponent, but after seeing the 4 black bodyguards on both sides, Yehu wisely chose to get out of the way. Mr. Yi, can you explain to me what is going on here? Yehu looked in the direction of the waiter's finger, blushed, and said embarrassedly, it's too cold, I have a little cold. The waiter looked up at the 25 degrees Celsius air conditioner and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. After checking, he found that nothing was missing, and the waiter didn't scold Yehu. Anyway, they had to change the quilt. Yehu put back on his clothes and took the elevator to the first floor, walked out of the gate and looked up at the restaurant on the 30th floor behind him, sighing slightly in his heart. He took out his wallet and opened it to find that there were only $300 in it. After checking the address recorded on his ID, Yehu hailed a taxi. An hour later, the taxi stopped in front of the house 3 streets away from the hotel. Looking at the remaining $50 in his hand, Yehu raised his middle finger at the taxi going away. The other party slammed on the brakes and began to reverse the car. Rushed to the house. He hurriedly opened the door, picked up the baseball bat on the table and waved it twice, and waited for the other party to come and get beaten. You damn yellow-skinned monkey, get out of here. Yehu's face turned cold. What he hated most was racial discrimination. He clenched the baseball bat in his hand and opened the door, preparing to teach the other party a bloody lesson. Next second, with a black gun pointed at his chest, Yehu raised the baseball bat in both hands and knelt on the ground with a plop, paying for his impulse. The strong man searched everything on Yehu's body, including the old-looking watch, but the other party did not enter the room. The brawny man just wanted to scare Yehu and didn't intend to kill anyone. After all, there were still a few surveillance cameras around him, so he didn't expect that Yehu would not miss something so good for nothing. The strong man threw a few documents on the ground, put his wallet in his arms, turned and walked towards his car. After a sound of engine, the taxi entered the main road. Yehu stood up, looked around and found no one, then quickly rushed into the house and cursed in a low voice. Get the hell out of here! Just leave me a pair of underwear and don't let me see you again. Looking at the old decorations in the house, Yehu sighed. Although his life was very desolate, he still didn't want to carry out the task of destroying the world. He promised the other party before because he was afraid of death. Now he is living well, although he has no money, but is it possible for a living person to starve to death in this city? Yehu walked into the bathroom, took a shower and changed clothes. Then he returned to the somewhat messy bedroom and opened his laptop to write out his testimonials. The person who logged into Facebook and found the hotel's avatar, clicked on the message sent by the other person, and was stunned in place. Before, he could converse fluently with others and thought it was a benefit from his time travel. However, it turned out that he could only read but not write. This was outrageous. Yehu, you can do it. Come on. After some encouragement, Yehu began to look for those videos with subtitles. Listened to the meaning expressed in the other party's language, and then began to study hard according to the subtitles below. An hour later, Yehu rubbed his eyes. The people in the video were so dedicated. Even though he was a big man, he still didn't forget to express his inner emotions. Yehu didn't feel tired until 3 o'clock in the morning. He ignored the toilet paper on the floor and went straight to the bed and closed his eyes slowly. The female teacher on the computer was pointing at the blackboard to teach students theoretical knowledge, and the students under the podium listened very carefully. Finally, under the leadership of a female teacher for practice, Yehu slowly fell into a dream while listening to the female teacher's unclear voice. Da-da-da-da. A burst of bullets woke him up from his sleep. Yehu turned off the computer and carefully came to the window, looking at the 2 groups of people fighting on the street. Subconsciously swallowed, only orange fireworks and the sound of bullets hitting his body could be seen on the dark street. Suddenly, the glass on the right side was shattered by a stray bullet, and Yehu was so frightened that he lay on the ground with his head in his hands and shivered. 5 minutes later, the fighting outside stopped. Yehu took a deep breath of his heart beating violently under the air pressure, looked at the broken windows, and decided to find an intermediary to sell the house to China tomorrow. He didn't want to stay in this wretched place for a moment no matter who liked to be treated. Chapter 3 Living on the Streets. What? Is this house for rent? Yes sir, if you need a change of living environment, we have houses in all sections of Hell's Kitchen. Wait a minute. Yehu raised his hand to interrupt the man's narration, and said in disbelief, where did you just say this is? Hell's Kitchen. What's wrong, sir? The man was a little surprised and didn't understand why the other party asked this question. Yehu stood up slowly and left the agency company, ignoring the man's attempts to stay. When he heard this name, he suddenly remembered that he was in Marvel and not in some parallel world. When he returned home, Yehu used his mind to communicate with the panel in his mind. There are 4 options on it: backpack, mall, contract, and world. Only the backpack and world are bright. The other options have a small lock mark. Yehu clicked on the backpack and saw a card at first glance. He focused his thoughts on it and quickly figured out the card's function. God's blessing. When using it, shout "I am destiny" and you will get 1 use of heaven-defying luck for half an hour. Looking at the card, Yehu had a bold idea in his mind and began to think about the feasibility of using this thing to buy lottery tickets. In the end, I gave up my thoughts. This thing is just a fallback and cannot be squandered casually. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Yehu opened the door and saw an old lady in her 60s looking at him with an angry face. Who are you looking for? Yi. When will you pay me your rent? You are already 2 days overdue. I ask you to give me 50 more as compensation. Yehu turned his head to avoid the other person's spit, with an awkward smile on his face. The son behind the landlord seemed to be difficult to get along with. After Yehu's righteous argument, Mrs. Felicia gladly accepted Yehu's notebook, and graciously said that he would not have to pay for the glass. Yehu, who was wearing short-sleeved shorts, was respectfully sent out of the house by Mrs. Felicia and her muscular son. It wasn't until he walked out of a street that the smile on Yehu's face gradually disappeared. In just 1 day, he was in such a state of despair. He had nothing on him except a few documents. Looking at the blonde hair and blue eyes coming and going on the street, a feeling of loneliness came to my heart. After walking aimlessly for half an hour, I subconsciously came to the hotel where I woke up yesterday. I looked up at the darkening sky and sighed before walking to the side. Garden. Looking at the homeless man on the recliner, there was a trace of confusion in his eyes. He didn't know how to live his life in the future, whether he should continue to be so muddle-headed or embark on the road of destroying the world. While Yehu was deep in thought, several men in black walked up to him and whispered, "Our organization is recruiting 50,000 recruits a month. As long as you dare to shoot." The other party's words were like the whispers of a devil. Yehu swallowed his saliva and shook his head vigorously. Several men looked at each other and then set their target on the next homeless man. 10 minutes later, 5 men in black led 20 homeless people. Han left the park and entered 3 vans. Looking at the convoy that was quickly retreating, Yehu felt a flash of regret in his heart, but this feeling went away as quickly as it came. The next day, Yehu suppressed his hunger and walked on the road to seek help. A 15-year-old boy sat not far from Yehu, holding a piece of cardboard with some help information written on it. Yehu curled up and looked at the little boy with sympathetic eyes. He sat here for a whole day. I haven't seen anyone give him a coin since he was a kid, so this kid is probably in trouble. Poor child, may God bless you. A woman with a mink fur draped over her shoulders bent down and touched the little boy's head, took out 5 franklins from her wallet and placed them in the boy's hand. She stood up and looked at Yehu with disdain. Damn it, are all beggars so involved? Does there still exist a king's method? Yehu was speechless as he watched the little boy get 1,000 yuan in just half an hour. Everyone who showed love would look at him with contempt, and some would even spit at him. At night, Yehu returned to the park and lay down on a chair a little weakly, his eyes fixed on the world options on the system panel. Just like what he said at the beginning, he didn't mind destroying the world as long as he could survive, let alone just deal with it. Some plot characters. Just when Yehu was choosing the world, a sound of footsteps came from a distance. Looking at the group of men in black last night, Yehu was a little undecided. It was too risky to travel through the world, but there was also no return when joining the puzzle. I'm willing to shoot. Yehu struggled to stand up. The leading black man curled his lips in disdain and waved. The 2 strong men left the team and came to Yehu's side. They lifted him up and walked towards the van. The driver handed him a panel and half a bottle of mineral water. It looks like it should be the other person's dinner. Yehu thanked him, picked up the bread and stuffed it into his mouth, touching his belly with a smile on his face. 10 minutes later, 5 men in black and 3 homeless people got into the van. The van turned around and drove into a factory. 5 men in black escorted 4 people into the factory. Smelling the pungent smell of disinfectant in the air, Yehu's pupils suddenly shrank and the words organ trafficking flashed in his mind. Just when he was about to resist, he saw the leading black man taking out a pistol and looking at him with cold eyes. "Don't worry, we don't sell organs here," the strong black man said in a calm tone, "you only need to cooperate to complete an experiment and then you can leave." Yehu's originally relieved heart was raised again. Human experimentation was much scarier than organ trafficking. Although he wanted to curse people, Yehu still chose to take steps under the threat of gunpoint. Looking at a guy with bone spurs on his back in a cubicle, Yehu's heart beat violently. The word mutant flashed in his mind. His original idea of traveling across the world immediately faded a lot. Instead of destroying the world, it would be better to bring the gods here. Used his blessing in exchange for a superpower. With the thought, Yehu's mood gradually calmed down, and a hint of praise flashed in the eyes of the strong black man beside him. He decided to talk to his head for a while and focus on taking care of this perseverant guy. After the handover was completed, the strong black man came to a young man in white robe and whispered a few words. The young man in white robe looked at Yehu carefully and then nodded, placing the 4 people in different compartments. "Maku told me that you have great potential. My name is Ajax and I am the person in charge here," the young man said while observing Yehu's body, reaching out to take the syringe handed over by the woman on the side and pouring the light blue liquid into it. Injected into Yehu's body, looking at Yehu with a distorted expression, Ajax's eyes flashed a hint of disappointment. "Ah!" Yehu let out a heartbreaking roar. Looking at Ajax, who was frowning slightly, the woman beside him quickly blocked Yehu's mouth with a piece of cloth. After a minute, Yehu's body began to expand, and the muscles that were originally restraining him, the belt, was stretched and rattled. The woman's forehead was sweating and she held Yehu tightly with both hands, and she no longer had the relaxed look before. Ajax's eyes flashed a hint of surprise. Chapter 4 Successful Mutation. Ajax and Angel pushed Yehu into the laboratory. This kind of experimental subject was already rare, and they decided to study it carefully. Seeing Angel walking towards him with a scalpel, Yehu subconsciously wanted to struggle. His body began to grow in size with his thoughts, and Ajax injected a potion into Yehu's body. A few seconds later, Angel fixed the unconscious Yehu to the wall. He walked out of the laboratory and controlled the robotic arm to inject different medicines into Yehu's body. Looking at Yehu, whose blood vessels were bulging and could explode at any time, the 2 of them shook their heads slightly. A look of disappointment appeared. The severe pain made Yehu wake up. Feeling the violent power in his body, Yehu moved his eyes to the divine blessing in his backpack, recited it silently in his heart, and then said in a low voice, "I am destiny." As soon as he finished speaking, the pain in his body disappeared instantly. Looking at Yehu, who returned to normal. Ajax once again operated the mechanical arm to inject medicine into the opponent's body, and did not stop until all the medicine was injected. Yehu frowned slightly as he looked at the densely packed superpowers on the system panel. Most of the superpowers were flashy garbage. How could he become extremely handsome in a place with no one? Why would he still be so handsome when there was no one around? Just when he was thinking about how to refine his abilities, the panel changed. A large number of abilities merged with each other, and finally only 6 abilities remained: super hearing, super vision, self-healing ability, heat ray, steel body, and mental power. Feeling the surging power in his body, Yehu raised the corners of his mouth slightly and stared sharply at the glass wall. The 2 people who were in a state of excitement trembled when they looked at Yehu's cold eyes. "He won't rush out, right? Don't worry, Angel. This laboratory is not easy to break through," Ajax comforted his assistant. Before the 2 of them could relax, they saw that the iron plates restraining Yehu began to twist and deform. When Ajax saw this, he turned around and ran away. Angel was stunned for a few seconds before reacting, and quickly chased the figure in the distance. Yehu stood barefoot on the ground and used his mental power to crush the 1-meter-thick iron door in front of him into a big iron ball. Angel, who was running away in the distance, showed a cruel smile, and 2 heat rays shot out from his eyes. Angel, who was running, felt his body light up and fell directly to the ground, and there was a sharp pain in his abdomen. Looking at the pair of bare feet that suddenly appeared in front of him, Angel raised his head and looked at Yehu with pleading eyes and said intermittently, "Please, please, let me go." Yehu's eyes flashed red and he turned his head to look at Ajax. At this moment, a laboratory in the distance suddenly exploded, and a figure swayed out of the flames. The scorched flesh began to heal quickly. Looking at the unrecognizable face, Yehu frowned and came to Ajax. Psychic power, super power, heat ray. Ha 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 ha, you are such a perfect weapon. Ajax showed a flush on his face. Although he could not escape, he was proud of himself for being able to create such a weapon. Yehu reached out and strangled Ajax's neck. The opponent's speed of dodging was like slow motion in his eyes. Ajax stretched out his hands and grabbed Yehu's hand and struggled hard. His legs kicked Yehu's body hard, and a dull sound of impact was heard in the air. Ajax looked at the opponent's bright silver body with a shocked look on his face. Just when Yehu was about to kill Ajax, a voice sounded from behind. "Dude, can you give him to me?" Yehu calmly stared at the ugly man behind him in silence for a second, then threw Ajax in front of him and turned towards the door. Several big men in black on duty tremblingly took out their pistols and aimed them at Yehu. A minute later, Yehu was wearing a black suit, eating pizza on the table while listening to the wailing of Ajax. "Wade! Only I can heal your injury." Wade stopped what he was doing when he heard this, and just as Ajax was beaming, a dagger passed through his back and nailed it to the ground. "Maybe I can heal your injury." Yehu walked to Wade's side and stretched out his hand to lay on him. The luck brought by the protection of the gods allowed him to infinitely magnify the possibility of something. That's why he was able to fuse dozens of superpowers into 6. Yehu imagined in his mind that Wade's healing power could overcome cancer cells. 3 minutes later, a handsome man shouted excitedly in the ruins. "Hey buddy, you'll be my best friend from now on, my name is Wade." Listening to the other person's endless words, Yehu, who has super hearing, felt like there were 1,000 ducks chirping in his ears. He used to like the other person in the movie, but now he just wants to put that person aside. "Open your mouth and sew it up." Wade, who was talking, covered his mouth in horror, and an invisible force blocked his mouth. After struggling to no avail, Wade turned his attention to Yehu. "Remember to keep your mouth shut in front of me from now on." "Okay." Wade nodded vigorously, and the congestion in his mouth suddenly disappeared in the next second. Looking at the blessing of the gods with 1 minute left, Yehu whispered, "I want a sum of money." Upon hearing this, Wade quickly walked up to Yehu, put his hand on the other person's shoulder and said in a grandiose tone, "Hey, brother, are you out of your mind? I know a very good doctor." Before the words were finished, the floor under the two of them suddenly cracked. Yehu used his mental power to stop himself in the air, and looked at the safe below with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Wade looked up at the safe with a beeping expression on his face. Yehu used his mental power to tear open the safe and wrap the suitcase inside. The suitcase appeared in the backpack in the next second. In the past, storing things required him to touch them with his body, but now that he has the mental power, he only needs to wrap things up and put them directly into the backpack. Yehu patted Wade on the shoulder and used his mental strength to support him to fly up the pothole. He smashed the ceiling and came to the air to look at the police car attracted by the explosion. He randomly chose a direction to leave the factory. "Goodbye little bitch." Yehu threw Wade in the alley and disappeared from the opponent's sight. The eyes of the elderly professor communication was unilaterally blocked. "Charles?" Yehu landed in an alley, his eyes flashing. He somewhat understood why Magneto wore a helmet. The reason he was able to shield Charles just now was entirely because of the distance. If they fought face to face, he would not be better than him. Certainty. The originally swollen heart immediately cooled down. Early the next morning, Vanessa opened the door and looked at the naked man in front of her, shouting in surprise, "Wade! Hi! Honey, can you let me come in and change my clothes?" Vanessa excitedly threw herself into Deadpool's arms, and the two of them walked from the door to the living room to the bathroom and finally back to the bedroom, leaving many marks along the way. Chapter 5 Goodbye. Yehu glanced at the panel, except that the suffix of the character column changed from ordinary person to surface level, the rest of the things remained unchanged. Yehu, who had 800,000 yuan in his pocket, was going to buy an apartment. The agent who had received him before arriving at the agency building slowly walked forward and said respectfully, "Sir, will you change your house this time when you come here? I plan to buy a house with a budget of 700,000. The man's eyes lit up and his smile became sincere. He took out a map and started recommending houses. Although various incidents often happened here in his memory, these are no longer problems when he has the strength. This is better than spending money to watch it in a theater. Many. Are there any residences near Stark Summer? Yehu looked at Stark Summer on the map with excitement. Living nearby would make it easier for him to watch the show up close. The man hesitated to speak and glanced at Yihu. Although he wanted to tell the other person that buying a house near Stark Daxia for 700,000 yuan was a fool's errand, he still tried hard to swallow it when he thought of the commission from this business. Dirty words, forced out a smile and said softly. What do you think of 6th Avenue uptown? The man pointed to a place 6 blocks away from Stark Daxia and looked at Yihu nervously. Okay, help me complete the formalities today and I will give you an extra 10,000 yuan as reward. Don't worry. I will definitely handle it for you. The man's eyes turned red when he heard there was an extra reward. 10 minutes later, Yihu walked into the police station and used his mind power to control a policeman to apply for a social security card for him. It was very troublesome to have no ID card here. 4 hours later, both parties signed their names under the witness of lawyers, and Yihu obtained the 300 square meter single-family villa. Although the seller was surprised that Yihu paid in cash, he didn't care too much, as long as the Franklin he got was genuine. Just fine. After sending a few people away, Yihu sat on the sofa and looked at the world options on the system panel. After hesitating for a few seconds, he slowly clicked on it. After some searching, his eyes stopped on the Supermarine's pattern. After a feeling of dizziness, Yihu appeared on a street. Sideways to avoid the delivery boy's speeding car, he was a little uncomfortable with the strong anime wind around him. After nightfall, Yihu flew into the sky and saw the whole world, a continent and 3 small islands. When he came to the edge of the continent, he found that everything here was illusory. He wanted to reach out and touch it, but was blocked by an invisible wall. After calming down his inner emotions, Yihu flew towards the city where the plot took place. As soon as he entered the town, he saw a fire in the distance, and he understood that this was when the plot began. Teddy's death made Xiao Hong very uncomfortable. He locked himself in his room for several weeks, turned on his computer and looked at the concerned greetings of several friends on the screen. Xiao Hong put on the computer with a bitter smile on his lips. At first, he wanted to prove to his brother that he wanted to make him proud, but now it doesn't matter. Xiao Hong threw the admission notice on the table into the trash can, picked up his battle robot and prepared to participate in the robot competition. Hiss, it hurts. Xiao Hong sat on the bed holding his feet and let out a cry of pain. The box in the corner of the room flashed twice and then began to expand. The soft and cute Bimax carefully came to Xiao Hong and whispered. Hello, I'm Dabai, your personal health consultant. Looking at the familiar robot in front of him, Xiao Hong's eyes flashed with nostalgia, but he was soon angered by Bimax's annoying questions. After a fight, Xiao Hong found the micro-robot in the coat under the bed and whispered. This thing should be attracted to other micro-robots, but they should all be destroyed in the fire. Xiao Hong casually put the micro-robot into the glass cover and began to debug the combat robot in preparation for the robot competition in a few days. Dabai carefully held the glass cover, looked at Xiao Hong and said softly. Where does your little robot want to go? While debugging the battle robot, Xiao Hong said casually, I don't know. Just go find where it wants to go. After debugging the parts, Xiao Hong suddenly found something missing around him. Looking at the fat figure on the road outside the window, he quickly picked up his coat and ran downstairs. Dabai is a souvenir left by his brother. He does not allow himself to lose him. Xiao Hong comes to the first floor and finds an excuse to perfunctory the enthusiastic aunt. He opens the door and chases Dabai. As he passes by the street, a piece of news comes from the TV. Dear city residents, please note that several natural disasters have recently occurred and engulfed nearby islands. Please stay away from the coastline unless necessary. Although Dabai's steps were small, their frequency was very fast. Xiao Hong could only keep the opponent within his sight. Yihu slowly landed on the beach. In the past few weeks, he had gone to a nearby island to test his strength. With all his strength, he could sink a 5-kilometer diameter island in a week. Yihu also understood that the strength represented by the surface level was not as expanded as before, and he was still far behind those big guys who destroyed the planet at every turn. After a chase, Xiao Hong and Dabai entered an abandoned factory. Looking at the micro-robots being processed inside, Xiao Hong's eyes flashed with shock. In the next second, all the micro-robots gathered into a huge black wave and rushed towards one person and one machine. 5 minutes later, Dabai used his fat body to protect Xiao Hong and escaped from the third-floor window. Yihu stood in front of Xiao Hong and said in a deep voice, I can help you find the arsonist and let you take revenge. The price is this. Xiao Hong stared blankly at the man who suddenly appeared. After a second of silence, he whispered, You mean that someone set the fire on purpose? Thinking that his brother's death was not an accident, Xiao Hong's eyes immediately turned red. Gritted his teeth and said, Tell me. Who set the fire? Looking at Yi Hu's cold eyes, Xiao Hong gradually came back to his senses. After a second of silence, he whispered, I agree. The deal is done. Yi Hu snapped his fingers and used his mental power to catch the eavesdropping professor on the third floor and casually crush the mask on his face. Professor. Looking at the figure under the mask, Xiao Hong's eyes flashed with confusion and hatred. The clever Xiao Hong combined the micro-robots found at the scene to immediately simulate the other party's criminal motives. Hatred instantly swallowed up his reason. Xiao Hong rushed towards the professor like a madman and beat him with his hands and feet. Until he was exhausted, he sat on the ground and roared hoarsely. My brother died because he went to save you. Why do you do this? Hearing Xiao Hong's words, a trace of guilt flashed in the doctor's eyes. Yi Hu crushed the doctor's limbs and threw them to the ground like garbage. He looked at Xiao Hong and said softly, It's your turn to make a choice now. Looking at the struggling professor, a trace of unbearability flashed in Xiao Hong's eyes. 3 minutes later, Xiao Hong walked home with Yi Hu and Dabai. I'm very satisfied with your service. Xiao Hong looked at Dabai and said softly. As soon as he finished speaking, Dabai put himself into a red box. Xiao Hong looked at the box that disappeared instantly and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. This was the first time he saw space folding technology. Feel sorry. Yi Hu looked at Xiao Hong and a heat ray flashed in his eyes. The surrounding scenery gradually became void after Xiao Hong died. A minute later, Yi Hu stood in the chaos and looked at the supermarines that were lit up on the panel. The thought of lighting up all the icons crossed my mind. Chapter 6 Jessica. Yi Hu locked the door and walked towards the shopping mall 2 streets away, preparing to buy some furniture for his new home. When he passed by a hotel, he suddenly heard a sickly voice. Jessica, I want you to fall in love with me from the bottom of your heart. Looking sideways, he saw a fashionable brown-haired beauty hugging a man in a purple suit. Although the woman was very angry, the way she hugged the man tightly showed the extraordinary relationship between the two. Yi Tiger thought the couple were cosplaying and turned to leave. Jessica, let's play a little game. I bet you can kill him with one punch. If I lose, how about letting you go? Kevin Thompson's words were like the whispers of a devil. Jessica had a look of pain on her face, but she walked up to Yi Hu honestly and swung her right hand hard to hit the other person on the head. After a loud noise, Jessica's white and tender right hand stopped in the air. The sick smile on Kevin Thompson's face gradually disappeared, and his body subconsciously secreted a virus that flew in the direction of Yi Hu. What are you doing? Yi Hu frowned slightly. Didn't he just glance at the two of them? Why was he so irritable? If this punch were to hit an ordinary person on the head, it would have the same result as splitting a watermelon with a stick. Seeing the painful look on the girl's face, Yi Hu whispered sick and turned to the mall. He didn't have time to play cosplay with the two of them. Stop! Kevin Thompson yelled at Yi Hu. Seeing that Yi Hu didn't respond, he immediately chased after him. Hey! I told you to stop! You yellow-skinned monkey! Yi Hu stopped and a look of anger flashed in his eyes. Seeing that his ability was working, Kevin Thompson showed a sneer on his face. He held his head high and said proudly, kneel down now. Lick my leather shoes clean. Kevin Thompson felt that his field of vision became higher, and then a feeling of suffocation came to his mind. Looking at Yi Hu's cold eyes, he subconsciously shouted, Help, help me. Jessica on the side showed unwillingness and moved her long legs to come to Yi Hu and punched and kicked her. However, all attacks were blocked by an invisible wall 5 centimeters away from Yi Hu. I hate it when people call me that. Yi Hu slowly closed his palms, and Kevin Thompson's eyes began to roll up. Just when he thought he was going to die like this, Yi Hu threw him to the ground with force and coldly snorted. Don't let me see you again. Otherwise I'll beat you every time I see you. Yi Hu stepped hard on Kevin Thompson's head and shouted loudly. Do you understand? Do you understand? Ming, I understand. I understand. Kevin Thompson suppressed his dizziness and shouted loudly. Jessica on the side looked at Yi Hu with a pleading look on his face. Please, help me. Shut up. Kevin Thompson shouted, and Yi Hu looked at the woman whose face was full of pleading but could not open her mouth to speak and felt that things were not what he imagined. Jessica Jones. Yehu called out tentatively, and the woman nodded wildly. Yehu looked down at Kevin Thompson. He vaguely remembered that Jessica's husband was a black man. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't look like him. It's black. When the two met by chance, he didn't want to seek justice. At this moment, Kevin Thompson, who was stepped on, sternly yelled, "Since you know each other, why don't you kneel down and admit your mistake? Otherwise, I will let her die in front of you. You deserve to die. Yellow-skinned monkey. I will peel off your skin and let you eat your own flesh." Kevin Thompson looked at Yehu triumphantly and felt that he had grasped the opponent's weak spot. He turned his head and shouted at Jessica, "Break off one finger immediately." Jessica groaned in pain, her left index finger showed a strange arc. Yehu raised his right foot and stepped on it hard, saying in a cold voice, "Why do you have to seek death?" Kevin Thompson showed a trace of astonishment on his face, his body twitched slightly, and he took his last breath unwillingly. Yehu ignored Jessica, who was crying, and disappeared in place in a few flashes. He was not sure if there was surveillance nearby, so he had to run away first. Yehu did not want to reveal his identity as a mutant before he was absolutely sure. He can barely be considered a low-end version of Superman now. There are too many people who are better than him in the Marvel world. At the same time, Hill knocked on Nick Fury's door at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. After entering, he whispered, "Director, the woman named Jessica you asked me to monitor was rescued." "Who was rescued? Was it someone from X Academy?" Nick Fury's face turned cold. Although he looked unchanged, Hill, who had worked with him for many years, still felt Nick Fury's anger. I checked the other party's information." A strange look appeared on Hill's face, and he said in a low voice, "That person used to be a sleep tester, but he suddenly lived on the street 10 days ago. Today, he was on the 6th the street, bought a house worth 700,000. Nick Fury frowned after hearing this, and the bald head of Charles subconsciously appeared in his mind. Although both of them were bald, they did not feel sympathy for each other but often had tit-for-tat confrontations. After listening to Yehu's information, the first thing Nick Fury thought of was the awakening of the mutant X gene, and he instantly figured out Charles's action plan to save Jessica with the help of the new mutant and expand the strength of the X-Men. Although Jessica had some mental problems, it wasn't difficult to find a mutant with spiritual counseling ability in the X Academy with diverse abilities. Damn! This bald bastard dares to play dirty. Hill glanced at Nick Fury's head, and lowered his head wisely, pretending that he was a mass of air. After venting a bit, Nick Fury showed a hint of helplessness on his face. A group of stinky fish and rotten shrimps will definitely not be able to defeat the X-Men in the opponent's hands. That's it. What about Luke Cage, whom I asked you to monitor before? Hill pondered for a second, and relevant memories quickly emerged in his mind, and he said calmly, "The other party opened a tavern in the downtown area and accepts private employment to help people deal with some difficult criminals." After hearing this, Nick Fury's expression softened slightly, and he said in a calm tone, "Continue to monitor, you can send someone to contact the other party." "Okay, Director." Hill nodded, turned around and left the office, and began to arrange people to approach Luke Cage. Yehu bought a big bed and a few sets of clothes after shopping around in the mall. When he passed by the previous hotel, he found that the police had blocked the intersection. He frowned and walked into the side alley to go back to the house. "Why do you keep following me?" Yehu turned around and glared at Jessica behind him. Ever since the two met in the alley just now, the other party had been following him. Could it be that he wanted to find a chance to knock himself out and take him to play in the secret room? An idea flashed in Yehu's mind, and he turned around and looked at Jessica carefully, and it seemed that it would not be too much of a disadvantage. Chapter 7 Tracking. Jessica was startled by this look. She took 2 steps back and looked at Yehu warily, like a wounded beast. Yehu turned around and walked quickly towards the house, closed the door and sat on the sofa waiting for the goods to be delivered from the mall. This will be his home from now on. Just when Yehu was thinking about his future life of eating melons, the door suddenly flew 2 meters away and hit the floor hard. "Are you sick? Why are you breaking down my door? You are also a person with powers." Jessica looked at Yehu blankly and said with a choked voice, "Thank you very much for rescuing me from hell." "So? This is how you express your gratitude?" Yehu pointed at the door on the ground and said in a bad tone, "One price is 800. Give me the money immediately and disappear from me." "I have no money." Jessica lowered her head and said helplessly, "Can you take me in?" I can help you work and use the money in exchange to pay the rent. Yehu touched his chin and looked at Jessica, who had a hot figure. She had such strange strength that she could pay off the rent even if she moved bricks. Thinking of the balance in the card, Yehu coughed lightly and nodded. Okay, the rent will be 2,000 a month. Jessica nodded happily. She had observed the environment of this single-family villa outside just now, although the other party's charges were several hundred yuan more expensive than outside. But she's not the kind of person who cares about everything. She doesn't plan to give the money anyway. It doesn't cost her life to ask for money. At worst, she will be bitten by a dog as soon as she lays down on the bed. Okay, the toolbox is over there. Fix the door for me immediately. Yehu pointed to the toolbox in the corner of the living room, got up and walked to the stairs to go upstairs to rest, turning his head and whispering to Jessica who was holding the tools. You can choose any room on the second floor to stay. Okay. Sir. Jessica nodded seriously, picked up the toolbox and came to the door frame. Yehu looked at the hard-working figure of the other party and praised his wise decision in his heart. This kind of good-looking and hard-working tool is easy to use. From now on, he will no longer need to do things like carrying gas tanks. Returning to the master bedroom on the third floor, Yehu slammed himself on the wooden bed. The huge force made the wooden bed make an overwhelming sound. An hour later, Yehu woke up to a burst of noise. Looking at the large truck outside the window, his eyes lit up and he hurried downstairs. Hey? Where's my front door? Looking at a big hole in the wall, Yehu felt bad all over. Jessica trotted to his side and said excitedly, Boss, they said the 3-meter the wide bed couldn't be lifted in, so I took the door off. Looking at Jessica's face, Yehu opened his mouth and whispered, You are so smart. Can't you just let them dismantle the bed and put it back together for me? Jessica wiped the saliva on her face, showed an expression of understanding, and whispered, Yes, it seems like this can be done. Go, 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 go upstairs, I don't want to see you now. Yehu waved his hand unhappily, walked straight to the person in charge, and said softly, Are you responsible for repairing the house? The person in charge looked at the big hole at the front door of the house, spread his hands and said helplessly, Mr. Yi, we are only responsible for delivering and installing furniture to each other, but this is not within the scope of our services. Yehu nodded and took out a stack of Franklin from the system backpack and put it in the opponent's hand, saying softly, Please, man, help me for the sake of God. You are such a devout believer, leave this little problem to me. Half an hour later, the truck quickly left the street. Looking at the brand new door and the large bed he carefully selected, Yehu had a satisfied smile on his face. As she walked up the stairs to the second floor, she saw Jessica walking out of the bathroom naked. Jessica glanced at the figure stopped at the top of the stairs and walked back to the bedroom calmly. It wasn't until that graceful back disappeared into the corridor that Yehu came back to his senses. He touched the non-existent nosebleed and slowly returned to the third floor. This wave of welfare was so delicious. Sir, do you need me to diagnose your heart rate too fast? Dabai's voice came from upstairs. Yehu shook his head and rejected the other party's proposal, reaching out to push the other party's slightly bloated body. Jessica, who was changing clothes on the second floor, heard the noise and came to the stairs to look up. As soon as I saw Dabai's honest look, I instantly fell in love with this cute guy. Boss, what is this? Jessica stretched out her finger and poked Dabai's belly, like a child who found a toy. Hello, my name is Dabai. Do you need me to check you up? Of course. Jessica rubbed Dabai's soft body. Yehu rolled his eyes and said angrily, Let's go and play, I'm going to sleep. Jessica's eyes lit up and she carried Dabai back to her room. Yehu lay on the bed and looked at the two options of the newly unlocked mall and contract on the panel. After thinking for a second, he moved his eyes to the mall. The next second, suddenly in front of his eyes, a bunch of items with prices appeared. Right above the mall were 3 categories: strength, scrolls, and life. There was a string of numbers behind the word points in the upper right corner. 2,000 points for 1 world. Yehu murmured in a low voice. He closed the mall and opened the contract option. He carefully looked at the introduction that appeared in front of him. The general meaning was that he could use the contract scroll to sign contracts with various creatures to take them out of the original world. The world helps himself to destroy the world. Yehu opened the mall again and clicked on the scroll category. He looked at the contract scroll worth 1,000 and shook his head. After closing the mall, he focused on the world option. The excitement in his heart when he lit up the icon was very exciting. After hesitating for a few seconds, Yehu gave up the idea of traveling again. His current strength was enough to survive in Marvel as long as he didn't offend those big guys. At this moment, there was an engine sound in the front yard. Yehu opened the curtains and looked at the bald man sitting in the wheelchair below and Jean Grey behind him. His heartbeat suddenly accelerated. This host of the Phoenix Power was a fierce man. Cyclops walked to the door and knocked on it. Jessica, who was playing with Dabai on the second floor, walked downstairs angrily, opened the door and looked at the four strange-looking people, frowned and whispered. "Who are you? What are you doing here? Don't be afraid, children, we are teachers at Xavier Academy for Gifted Boys, and we want to hire you as a teacher." Jessica rolled her eyes and was speechless. Don't the scammers nowadays investigate the information? Isn't it funny to ask a bad student who dropped out of high school to teach others? Do you have to teach them how to skip class yourself? Just as Jessica was about to close the door, a voice sounded in her mind, "Don't be afraid of children, we are all the same kind of people." Jessica looked at Charles in surprise. If she hadn't met Yehu, she might have chosen to report to the group to keep warm. "I prefer my life now to being a teacher." Hearing Jessica's answer, Professor Charles nodded slightly, and moved his gaze behind the other party. Chapter 8 Luke Cage. "I don't like being a teacher, and I ask you not to disturb my life in the future. This is good for both of us, right?" Yehu patted Jessica on the shoulder to signal her to step back and look calmly at the four people in front of her, eyes flashing red. Charles was slightly startled. This was the first time he saw someone who could perfectly control eye mutations. The other person's ability was somewhat similar to Cyclops. After a second of silence, Charles said slowly, "Please don't kill innocent people indiscriminately, otherwise." Before the other party could finish speaking, Yehu closed the door forcefully, and the corner of Charles's mouth twitched, feeling a little embarrassed. Seeing this, Jean Grey pushed the other party to the lawn behind her, got on the invisible blackbird and left quickly. Listening to the sound of the engine fading away, Yehu breathed a sigh of relief. He returned to the living room and sat on the sofa. He looked at the somewhat reserved Jessica and said softly, "Don't worry, you may not meet them in the future. Go and play with Dabai." "Yes, boss." After dinner, Yehu lay on the bed looking at the ceiling and thinking about his future life. Eating melons also requires money. The best way he could think of was to buy like crazy when Stark Industries stock fell and then eat the dividends for a lifetime. But this requires money. A lot of money. In addition, he would go to Wakanda and steal 10 or 8 tons of vibranium from a prince whose family owns a mine, and instantly become one of the world's richest men. But Wakanda has an energy shield and even if he goes there, he can't find the other party's location. A few vague gunshots were heard in the silent night. Yehu got out of bed and walked to the window. Looking at the deep night sky, the idea of robbing the rich and giving to the poor came to his mind. That group of underground black forces probably didn't mind using some money to accumulate some moral virtue for themselves. 5 minutes later, a figure sneakily left 6th Avenue and ran toward Hell's Kitchen in downtown. Jessica stood by the window and frowned as she looked at the retreating shadow. The other party's hidden appearance was definitely not to speak out for justice. Yehu sat on the rooftop and looked at the two waves of people fighting life and death below. He was so immersed in eating melon that he completely forgot the purpose of coming out this time. A strong black man rushed out of a street bar and started beating anyone he saw. The two groups of people who initially disliked each other suddenly switched their guns. Da-da-da-da. After a burst of intensive gunfire, the strong black man tore off his tattered clothes, roared and rushed towards the crowd again. 3 minutes later, only the strong black man was left standing in the entire street. "Go back and tell your boss that this store belongs to me, Luke Cage. If you want it to be popular, go to another place." Luke stepped into a hole in the cement floor and stared at the two little bosses with a cold tone. Said, "Do you understand?" "Ming, understand." The two said in unison. Luke snorted and returned to the bar. As the door closed, everyone lying on the ground immediately breathed a sigh of relief. They helped each other stand up and lost the life and death atmosphere before. Yehu followed a group of people to a bar and pushed in the door as if nothing had happened. His powerful mental power instantly controlled everyone present. He strolled up to a strong man and poured himself a glass of wine, releasing the other person's restrained tone. He said easily, "Man, who is your boss? I want to negotiate a business deal with him. I'm the boss here." The strong black man moved his body and looked at the immobile men around him. He had a clear understanding of Yihu's strength and said in a soft tone, "You want me to hire you? I can't hire you here. Satisfactory salary." Looking at the funny actions of the strong man, Yihu raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "I'll tell you a number, 5 million. Take it out and I'll leave. If you can't take it out, I'll send you away." "Wait." The strong black man raised his hands and said helplessly, "Brother, do you have any misunderstandings about our industry? Do you think a small gang like me can come up with 5 million in cash?" Yihu's eyes were fixed, and the other person's heartbeat had not changed from the beginning to the end. The chance of lying was very small. Looking at Yihu's cold eyes, the strong man swallowed and whispered, "If you need it, I can hand over the goods in my hand for you. I don't want your goods. Take out all the cash now." "Okay. No problem. You have the final say." The strong man came to the wine cabinet and twisted a bottle of red wine. The entire wine cabinet immediately moved to both sides to reveal the safe in the center. After entering the password, the strong black man looked at Yihu with a flattering look. "Dude, the money is here, don't hurt me." Yihu wrapped the money in the safe with his telekinesis and put it in his backpack. He watched the submissive strong man walking to the door with some disappointment. "Hey, you should turn in those illegally obtained finances to the police." Yihu turned around and looked in the direction of the sound. A man wearing red tights and holding a guide stick came out of the alley. Yihu said jokingly, "Matt Murdoch, how are you going to stop me?" The moment he heard his name, Matt's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and he subconsciously rushed out to subdue the opponent. Yihu stood there and ignored Matt's movements. The guide stick hit his right arm hard, making a sound of gold and iron. Matt retreated quickly and listened carefully to the opponent's movements. The contact just now allowed him to judge that the opponent had a weapon such as a cane and was extremely powerful. Matt switched between several attack methods to try to find Yihu's flaw. "Are you a mutant?" A minute later, Matt looked in the direction of Yihu and his tone was full of affirmation. Yihu shrugged his shoulders and used his mental power to throw the other person into the alley. He said in a cold voice, "Don't bother me anymore." Matt rolled several times in the alley and hit the trash can hard. This was his weakest fight since his debut. The opponent completely treated him like a child. Yihu walked around a few times and returned to 6th Avenue. He looked at Jessica sitting in the living room and said angrily, "Why do you care if you don't sleep at night? Boss, are you out to do bad things?" Jessica frowned like a brave police detective facing the darkness. Yihu walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He threw the money he grabbed tonight on the ground and spoke in a bad tone. "Don't we need to eat? These are the money of a small gang. If you feel uncomfortable, you can return it to them." "Hey! Boss, you misunderstood me." Jessica knelt down and stuffed a few wads of banknotes into her clothes, and said righteously, "Please be sure to take me with you next time. How can boss be allowed to do such a dirty and tiring job as moving money? Do it yourself." Yihu rolled his eyes and took the money back into his system backpack. Looking at the suddenly disappearing banknotes, Jessica's eyes flashed with pity. She held her pocket tightly and decided not to admit it for a while. "Okay, go back to sleep. Go out to find a job tomorrow. If you can't pay the rent next month, get out." Yihu glared at Jessica fiercely and turned towards the stairs. After the footsteps disappeared, Jessica took out the banknotes she had just embezzled, her eyes curled into crescent shapes. Chapter 9 Small Gains. The next morning, as soon as Yihu walked into the living room, he saw Jessica stuffing the last piece of toast into her mouth. Looking at the empty plates on the dining table, Jessica scratched her head in embarrassment and whispered, "Sorry, boss, I'm too hungry to resist eating your share." Looking at the other party's aggressive manner, Yihu didn't bother to say anything. He walked through the living room and opened the door and said softly, "Remember to find a job." Jessica looked at the closed door with some disappointment, cursing Yihu in her heart for being incomprehensible and ungentlemanly. Just as she was about to get up and go back to the house to sleep, there was a sound in her stomach. Jessica slowly came to the door with a sigh and bent down to pick up the 4 francs on the ground. With a bright smile on her face, she picked up the key and rushed to the burger restaurant 2 streets away. Yihu was still thinking about Jessica. Did that stupid girl see the money she threw on the floor? At this moment, there was a loud noise from behind, and when I looked back, I saw Jessica disappeared from sight like a urha who had escaped from the rope. I felt sorry for my iron door for 3 seconds, and decided to change it to a door made of vibrating gold when I had money. Jessica quickly ran to the burger joint and ordered 3 meals for 2. The waiter gave her a strange look. No matter how she looked at her, she couldn't hold so much food in her figure. 10 minutes later, the waiter looked at Jessica, who was taking a bite of a burger, and suddenly felt that she was not as good looking as before. Jessica took a sip of Coke, swallowed the food in her mouth, leaned on the seat and let out a long burp. The diners around looked at Jessica, who was sitting like a woman, and shook their heads, picked up their children, and prepared to leave. After eating and drinking, Jessica handed the waiter a franklin, collected her change, and turned to walk out the door. A sharp breaking sound sounded on the street, followed by the scream of the little girl. Jessica looked around and saw a Ford swaying left and right on the road. The little girl standing in the middle of the road screamed and moved her body back and forth. Seeing that she was about to be hit, the girl crouched down with her head in her arms and cried helplessly. After the loud noise, Jessica gently picked up the little girl and handed it to the woman who rushed over. Looking at the backs of the mother and daughter leaving in a hurry, Jessica showed a satisfied smile on her face. This feeling of helping others, she likes it very much. Hey! Do you just want to leave like this? The driver opened the door and got out of the car and said angrily, "Don't you have to pay for beating my baby like this?" Jessica, who was about to leave, froze and somewhat understood why the mother and daughter ran in such a hurry. Thinking of the driver trying to avoid a car accident just now, Jessica sighed and said fearlessly, "I have no money." The strong man's eyes almost popped out. This was the first time he saw someone say this so confidently. The other person's appearance made him feel like he was the bad guy. The words of compensation were stuck in his throat and it was very uncomfortable. Just when he was about to admit that he was unlucky, Jessica continued, "Although I have no money, my boss has it." The man looked Jessica up and down, and defined her as a rich businessman and lover. Although he had great strength, his brain was not very smart. "No wonder it's just a lover," the man put away the thoughts in his heart, and said in a deep voice, "Get in the car and show me the way, I'm going to ask for an explanation." Jessica got into the car obediently and showed the other party the way. Yehu walked towards the house with brisk steps. It was cool to have a backpack and go out without taking anything. "This is what you are doing." Yehu opened the door and looked at the 2 people sitting on the sofa. He felt that there seemed to be something on his head. What did he mean by raising someone without carrying his own money, and taking it home openly and openly? "Are you her boss?" The strong man stood up and glanced at Yehu. His expression immediately changed to an angry state. He pointed at the car outside the window and said, "Just now, I was humming a song while driving and suddenly she grabbed the front of the car. You! Look what she did to my car." Yehu glanced sideways at the severely deformed Ford outside the window, and said in a relaxed tone, "Stop talking nonsense, let's count. 100,000. There was a glint in the man's eyes, and he secretly thought that he had found a treasure this time, and the other party looked like a perfect sheep. "Take it." Yehu took out $1,000 from his pocket and handed it to the man. Seeing that the man was a little surprised, he said disdainfully, "Do you think I look like a fool? Either take the money and leave, or I'll kill him on the spot as a burglary you." The man grabbed the franklin and ran towards the door. The car quickly disappeared from the street after the sound of an engine. "Boss, don't be angry, please listen to my explanation." Jessica lowered her head and told what happened. Listening to Jessica's description, Yehu said angrily, "No matter what you do in the future, you must run away as soon as possible." "Got it, boss." Jessica nodded vigorously. Yehu turned on the TV in the living room, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. He looked at the news that Stark was going to the military base to test weapons. Flashing slightly, he whispered, "Iron Man 1." Looking at Stark's confident smile on the TV, Yehu had a bright smile on his face. "As the military liaison to Stark Industries, I have the privilege of working with such a patriot. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to present this year's highest honor to Mr. Tony Stark." Colonel Roddy had a smile on his face. He felt honored that his friend had achieved such an achievement. Listening to the applause from the audience, Roddy began to organize his words for a while. His friend often did not follow the routine and would definitely ask some tricky questions. Question: Roddy had a look of wisdom on his face. Stark was not seen until the applause from the audience disappeared. The smile on Roddy's face gradually stiffened, and he wanted to use his toes to create a Tony Stark. Obadiah Stan walked up to the stage with a smile, took the trophy from Rhodey's hand, and said in a relaxed tone. This trophy is so beautiful. Although I am not Tony Stark, I will tell everyone about my honor and joy. Everyone knows that Tony's greatest advantage is his shortcoming. Once he works, he will forget to eat and sleep. Obadiah Stan's relaxed and humorous tone quickly brought the situation under control. Colonel Rhodey stood aside and scolded Stark in his heart. Although Obadiah Stan said that he forgot about food and sleep, no one was present. He would believe it, but everyone still applauded. After the game, Colonel Rhodey once again thanked Obadiah Stan for his rescue. After watching him leave, Roddy found Tony Stark through military intelligence channels. Half an hour later, Roddy parked his car at the entrance of the exchange meeting, walked in and looked at Stark, who was holding a beautiful woman in his arms and chatting and laughing not far away. Although he had expected it, he still felt that his blood pressure was rising. Chapter 10 Patriot. Tony. Do you know how embarrassed I was just now? Roddy walked up to Stark and kept spitting, wanting to kill this fucker with a gun. Okay, isn't there Obadiah Stan? Tony Stark took the trophy handed over by Roddy and said casually, besides, no one is forcing you to present the award. Roddy's face turned black and he had the urge to curse. Roddy's arrival made Stark give up the idea of playing poker with the two beauties, and the two quarreled and left the poker table. I'm leaving first. Don't be late tomorrow. Okay, don't worry. Tony nodded insincerely and handed the trophy to the passers-by. In his eyes, this thing was just a unique piece of glass with no value at all. As soon as he walked out of the gate, a female reporter shouted loudly from a distance, Mr. Stark, excuse me, can I ask you a few questions? Is it pretty? Tony asked his confidant Happy in a low voice, and when he heard the other party say that he was pretty, Tony turned to look at the female reporter with a smile on his face. While perfunctorily interviewing the other party and thinking about how to invite the other party to play poker, the reporter brought the topic to his father, Howard Stark, and said that the other party was a businessman who was struggling to make a fortune. Tony took off his glasses and said with a serious face, my father helped the world defeat the Nazis, participated in the Manhattan Project, many people including your college professors say he is a hero. Although he resented his father in his heart, Tony would never allow anyone to say bad things about the other person in front of him. The reporter woke up slowly from the bed early the next morning, touched the cold bed and felt a little disappointed. After all, the other person chose to have a kidney rather than a heart. Bosie walked into the room with a set of clothes. After a confrontation, the reporter walked out of the villa with a pale face. Bosie never paid attention to such a woman with no ability. She knew that she could not enter Stark's world. Tony. You made me wait here like a fool for 3 hours. Roddy complained unhappily as he stood on the gangway. Tony waved his hand and stood in front of Roddy and said softly, okay, now I'm waiting. Is you? Roddy walked into the cabin with a dark face. 10 hours later, the plane slowly landed at Baclawn Air Force Base. The officer who came to pick up the plane looked at the drunken Colonel Roddy and frowned slightly, but remembered his relationship with Stark. Just pretend you didn't see it. This is Stark Industries' brand new product, the Jericho missile. Stark waved to the missile launcher on the side. A missile was instantly ignited and launched, splitting into dozens of small missiles above the target, carrying out a large-scale range fire coverage. The huge wave of air pushed Stark forward and blew the hats of all the officers away. Looking at the flattened hills, the officers had ecstatic expressions on their faces. No man could refuse such a powerful weapon. Just when Tony Stark was about to leave, a phone call came in. Obadiah Stan lay on his side on the bed and said softly, Tony, how's it going? Very good, it's very lively here now. By the way, Obadiah, why don't you wear the pajamas I bought for you? That's good. That's my peace of mind. Good night, Tony. Looking at the dark screen, Tony rolled his eyes. He still respects this elder, but his speech style often makes people feel uncomfortable. Tony has become accustomed to the existence of Obadiah Stan, who can always handle those annoying media, and with Boza taking care of his daily life, he can do what he wants to do as he pleases. After hanging up the phone, Obadiah Stan's face darkened instantly. While he hated Tony, he was also jealous of his talent. Hey, he's already set off. Remember to do things beautifully. Obadiah Stan deleted the call history and looked at the contacts on his phone. Tony's childhood flashed through his mind. After thinking for a second, he threw the phone aside and whispered, Sorry, Tony, I just want to get what I deserve back. Tony, who was sitting in the pickup truck, accepted the soldier's request to take a photo with him. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and the pickup truck in front was blown away. The convoy was forced to stop, and the soldiers quickly rushed out of the pickup truck. Mr. Stark, stay inside and don't come out. The soldier sitting next to Tony opened the car door and jumped out. After a gunshot, the soldier's body slowly fell down. Stark's pupils shrank and he subconsciously covered his mouth to prevent himself from spitting out. This was the first time he saw it. Someone died in front of him. The severe panic made him subconsciously want to escape from here. He opened the door and stumbled out of the car and headed for the distance. Suddenly a missile landed 2 meters next to him. Looking at the familiar Stark Industries icon above, Tony's eyes flashed with surprise and he threw himself into the deep pit aside. After a loud noise, Tony lay in the pit with a buzzing sound in his ears. The next second, his chest began to blood seeps out. The excruciating pain made him lose consciousness. Looking at Stark, who was seriously injured and unconscious, the young leader of the Ten Rings gang who came over shot the younger brother who had just fired the cannonball in the head. After discovering that Stark was still breathing, the little boss immediately asked people to take him back to the base. The doctor briefly treated Stark's wound, but the iron fragments in his blood vessels were not something that his level could handle. I can handle the shrapnel thing. Dr. Ethan stood up slowly. The little boss waved his hand and several armed terrorists led Dr. Ethan to Stark. After some operations, Dr. Ethan made a charging magnet to absorb the shrapnel. Stay, temporarily save Stark's life. The little boss nodded with satisfaction. As long as Tony could make the missile alive, he could report it to the Mandarin. 2 days later, Tony opened his hazy eyes and looked at the dim cave. Just when he wanted to get up, he felt a pain in his chest. If I were you, I wouldn't do strenuous activities right now. Who's there? Tony squinted at the figure walking out of the shadows. Ethan said in a relaxed tone, if the shrapnel enters your blood vessels, I can only use electromagnets to absorb them. What a good idea. Tony figured out the principle of this thing on his chest after a few fiddles. After a conversation, Tony found that the other person was indeed a knowledgeable person. After the life threat disappeared, Tony thought of the logo on the missile. At this time, he wanted to laugh. The weapons researcher almost died on the weapon he developed. He felt that there was nothing funnier in the world than this. He felt hard to breathe when he thought of terrorists using their own missiles to do bad things. He always thought that what he did was right. Only by using weapons to deter others would the world be peaceful, but reality taught him a lesson. His belief collapsed at this moment and he felt that his life had lost its purpose. Ethan on the side began to persuade Stark. Chapter 11. Do you want to be a detective? Yehu looked at Jessica up and down with suspicion in his eyes. He felt that the brain-burning profession of detective was not suitable for a simple-minded person like Jessica. Then I might not be able to repay the debt. Jessica spread her hands and put on a knife-cutting posture. Yehu narrowed his eyes and began to calculate the pros and cons. Living alone and living with a beautiful woman are two different experiences. Besides, there will always be someone to help him when he is watching in the future. Popcorn, Coke, that sort of thing. Okay, then go ahead and give it a try. If it doesn't work, go to the construction site and move bricks. I think you can support a small project by yourself with your strength. Yehu picked up the water glass on the table and took a sip. Jessica snorted and left the house angrily. Yehu got up and walked into the kitchen to fry 2 eggs for himself. He smelled the smell of oil smoke in the air and suddenly wanted to eat. Robot maid, the TX model female robot in the Terminator flashed in my mind. The flamethrower she brought with her was simply a must-have made for cooking and cooking when traveling at home. But if he wants to get the opponent, he has to compete with Skynet. Now he can't withstand the attack of nuclear bombs. After eating the eggs, Yehu chose to go back to bed and lay down to meditate. Jessica walked on the road and touched the bills in her pocket. She went to the copy shop and printed 100 flyers, and then started to distribute them on the road, hoping that someone with a lower IQ would hire herself to do the work. Catch the thief. I'll give you 10,000 yuan if you catch him. Suddenly a shrill voice sounded in the crowd, and a man holding a dagger rushed towards her with a diamond-encrusted bag in his hand. Jessica's eyes lit up and she felt that God was helping her. Go away. Smelly woman. The man yelled and waved the dagger at Jessica's face. An ordinary woman would have chosen to retreat to save her face. Jessica quickly stretched out her hand and held the man's wrist and used a slight force to crush the opponent's wrist bone. The dagger fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. A woman in mink fur shook her fat and stopped in front of Jessica. She reached out and took the bag from the other party, opened it and looked at the contents inside and whispered. "Thank you so much." The woman's eyes narrowed and she never mentioned money. She picked up her bag and turned around to leave. Jessica was slightly startled. This was different from what she thought. Listening to the piercing siren in the distance, Jessica was shocked and immediately remembered what her boss told her. She glanced at the man lying on the ground. His broken hand bones should cost a lot of money. At the thought of losing money, Jessica turned around and ran away. 3 minutes later, 2 police officers came to the man's side. "Sir, are you okay? Do you still remember the appearance of the thief who robbed him?" A young black policeman squatted beside the man and asked while checking the man's injuries. Neither policeman doubted the other's identity. After all, this was such a miserable look. No one would care about the knife on the ground. In their impression, robbery requires an M1911 and at the very least, a revolver. Who would use a knife to rob in an area where firearms are abundant? Isn't this funny? No. He covered his face with a scarf. "I didn't see it clearly." The man endured the pain and his words were slurred. He just wanted to leave here quickly. If he really confesses Jessica, he will face a pair of confessions. Prison disaster. No matter what the other party asked, the man's answers were vague. Finally, the older police officer turned around and left the unwilling black young man. Why did Tom leave? That person was obviously injured by a mutant. This is a big case. If it is completed, you and I will be promoted. Edwards shouted, dissatisfied at his partner. He had just joined the job. I especially want to prove myself. Okay. Edwards, do you think this thing we have can deal with mutants? Tom gently patted the M15 pistol on his waist with a hint of helplessness on his face. The young man was impulsive and did not care about the consequences. Edwards also calmed down after hearing his partner's words. At the corner of the street, a meticulous old man wearing a black suit and his hair was looking at Edwards silently. Feeling his old body, Kay decided to give him a chance. Jessica ran all the way back to the house along the alley, opened the door, and sat on the sofa, breathing heavily. Yehu frowned and didn't understand why the other party was crazy. He looked at the figure of Justin Hammer on the TV and touched his chin. Stark hadn't been on the show recently. It must be that he was in danger. Yehu decided to go to Stark Tower to have a chance. Look. Looking at the dark building, Yehu felt that he had made a stupid decision. As Stark's secretary, how could he squeeze into the subway like ordinary office workers? He squatted at the door of the building all afternoon without seeing each other. When he thought of Yehu in the underground parking lot, he wanted to slap his stupid self twice. Just when Yehu was about to go home, an anxious voice sounded from across the street. Stop! I order you to stop or I'm going to shoot. Edwards raised his pistol and aimed at the figure in the distance, but the opponent was moving too fast and he was not sure to hit the opponent without hurting the pedestrians. Looking at the two people walking away, Yehu shook his head and prepared to go to Stark's Manor to try his luck tomorrow morning. Edwards chased the other person to the viaduct and looked at the figure jumping down. His whole body felt bad, thinking that the other person was a lunatic. But when he came to the bridge, he saw that the other person continued to run like a normal person. Oh, damn! Edwards cursed in a low voice, looked at the double-decker bus that was slowly approaching, gritted his teeth, held on to the fence and jumped off. The passengers on the bus were startled by the figure soaring from the sky. But when he saw the badge on the opponent's chest, his eyes immediately became calm. Edwards quickly ran off the bus and intercepted the opponent on a remote path. He put his arm against the opponent's neck and roared. You're under arrest. Do you hear me clearly? Boy, you're done. He's coming. He's coming. A flash of panic flashed in the man's eyes, and Edwards said disdainfully, I will arrest him even if he comes. The man yelled and broke free from Edwards' restraints, ran towards the mall across the street on all fours and quickly climbed to the top floor. Edwards, who was holding the gun, had dull eyes, and he suspected that he was not awake. But the belief in his heart did not allow him to back down. Edwards smashed the glass door of the mall with a gun, crazily climbed the stairs and finally blocked the opponent on the top floor. He's here, my mission failed. Edwards pointed the gun at the man and said in a cold voice, Who are you? Just now, the other person's eyes turned into vertical pupils. Although it only lasted for a moment, he was sure that he saw it correctly. The man slowly retreated to the edge of the rooftop, and his body slowly lay back. No! Edwards shouted and came to the edge of the rooftop, looking at the corpse below with a trace of confusion in his eyes. Chapter 12 Men in Black. Sir, his eyes have turned into vertical pupils, and he still has a weapon in his hand. Edwards sat in the interrogation room and looked helplessly at his boss who kept moving around. No one would believe him if he told the truth these days. You said the weapon turned into smoke after being dropped on the ground? Why didn't other agents discover this problem? Sir, with all due respect, some agents' waistlines are too thick, which is why they can't keep up. The teammate standing nearby shouted dissatisfied like a cat whose tail was stepped on, "Get out of here, do you have a problem with us? I think you were the one who threw him off the roof." After an argument, the two left the interrogation room. A woman quickly walked up to Edwards and whispered, "I am the coroner Nalu. I believe what you said. Come to the autopsy room to find me later. I have evidence." After the woman finished speaking, she walked towards the door. Looking at the back of Edwards who was leaving in a hurry, Edwards was a little anxious. Just as he was thinking about whether to go to the autopsy room, a magnetic voice came from the door. "Hello ma'am, are you Coroner Nalu?" "Yes. Can you please look here?" Edwards looked at the white light flashing outside the glass with some surprise. Then a dark-skinned man wearing sunglasses strolled into the interrogation room and turned off the monitor. Edwards said doubtfully. "Who are you? Did he tell you anything?" Kay took off his glasses and sounded very serious. Edwards subconsciously said, "He told me that the end of the world has come." After finishing speaking, he couldn't help laughing. Kay heard the words and said with a heavy tone, "Did he say when it was? Can you recognize that weapon when you see it again?" Edwards was infected by the other party's tone, and said with a serious face, "Of course." Kay pondered for a second and said softly, let's go for a drive." The two came to a shop. After getting off the car, Edwards said in a relaxed tone, "This is Jack's shop. He sells stolen goods but not guns." "Really?" Kay shrugged indifferently, and Edwards said in a low voice, "I'll go in and ask him a few questions, you wait here for me." After speaking, he opened the door and walked in, looking at Jack who was packing up the stolen goods, and said in a bad tone, "I heard you are selling guns. As you can see, this is all my goods." Jack pointed to the stolen goods on the table. At this moment, Kay pushed the door open and walked in. The moment he saw Kay, Jack's body trembled slightly, and he said with a guilty conscience, "Kay, how are you? Show him the imported goods." Kay raised his gun and looked at Jack indifferently, and said in a bad tone, "I'll count to 3. Dude, he has a bad temper, hurry up and explain it." Edwards shrugged his shoulders and tried to persuade the nervous Jack. At this moment, Kay suddenly shot the opponent in the head. Edwards's expression changed, he raised his pistol, pointed it at Kay and shouted loudly. "Put down the gun! Put your head in your hands! We warned him! Put down the gun! Hurry up!" Edwards ignored K's excuse and classified him as mentally ill. At this moment, a cold voice sounded from behind the counter. "What a rude bastard! Do you know how much that hurts?" Edwards slowly put down the gun and looked at Jack's regrown head in disbelief. Kay raised the gun again and said indifferently, "Take out the gun or I'll shoot you again." Jack swallowed and reached out and pressed the button under the counter. The wall behind him immediately flipped over and a gun with a unique shape appeared in front of the two of them. Kay said calmly, "Mr. Edwards, go see if you have that weapon." Edwards swallowed, looked carefully at the guns on the wall, and said softly, "The one in the middle." There was a hint of helplessness on Jack's face, and Kay stepped forward and said indifferently, "You actually sold the reflective carbonization energy conversion gun to the SIBO people without a license. He looks like a good man." Jack forced out a smile and defended feebly. Kay ignored the other party's excuse and said in a deep voice, "Who is the person he wants to assassinate?" No, I don't know." Jack closed his eyes and did not dare to look at the gun in front of him. Kay slowly put down the gun and said in a cold voice, "All the guns here are confiscated. You can take the next spaceship and leave the Earth or I will kill you." After the two left, Jack curled his lips disdainfully. Kay slowly put on his sunglasses and looked at Edwards, who looked sad, and said in a calm tone, "Are you still thinking about the problem? Don't worry, you will forget about this matter soon. How could? Before Edwards could finish speaking, a white light flashed before his eyes. The two sat in the restaurant chatting for a while. Kay looked at his watch to end his cold joke, stood up and handed a business card to Edward and said in a calm tone. See you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you can come or not. Edwards looked at the business card in his hand with only one place name on it, 504 Bailey Street. Just when Jack was about to pack his luggage, a voice rang out in the shop, I just said it looks familiar, so it's the man in black. Jack looked at the man who suddenly appeared and subconsciously wanted to get a gun, but found that his body could not move and could only watch as the man took away all the weapons in the store. You actually have this thing. Yehu picked up a small pistol with a flash of nostalgia in his eyes. He remembered that this gun was the first weapon Kay gave to Jay. Although it looked low, its actual power was still considerable. Yehu looked up at GK and said in a flat tone, Is there any other private goods? No. No more. As soon as he finished speaking, Jack's whole body was crushed into bloody foam by his mental power. He had no sympathy for the alien Yehu, especially one who was so ugly. Yehu walked out of the store and started looking for the building that looked like a flying saucer. He remembered that the cockroach wanted to take that ride to leave the Earth. He wanted to buy Coke and popcorn in advance to watch the live broadcast. He was especially looking forward to the scene where Kay was swallowed by the giant cockroach. Yehu never thought of contacting Kay. He was not Edwards and did not have a father who dedicated himself to the cause of the Earth. Kay would only use the memory eraser to blind his titanium alloy dog eyes. Early the next morning, Edwards came to the location of the business card and looked at the Bridge and Tunnel Authority written on it, his eyes a little dull. He had never heard of this name. After some tests, Edwards successfully ran for the man in black. Kay took him to a seat by the river and said softly. There are about 1,500 aliens on Earth, most of whom live in Manhattan. Most of them are honest and just want to make a living. Why hide things? Humans are very smart and can deal with these problems. Edwards spread his hands and was puzzled. Kay said meaningfully, one person is smart but everyone is stupid. 1,500 years ago, everyone knew that the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everyone knew that the Earth is flat, and 15 minutes ago you knew that the only people on Earth were humans. K's words made Edwards think deeply and arouse a little curiosity about this profession. What's the harm? The bad thing is that no one will remember you. I'll give you a day to think about it, and I'll come see you early tomorrow morning. Kay patted Edwards on the shoulder and stood up and walked away. Chapter 13 Trouble Comes to the Door. Yehu was very interested in the so-called Milky Way, which was a super energy source after all. As for whether the Aquilonians would destroy the Earth, Yehu felt that the other party had to ask Odin first and then the Ancient One. Not just any alien race can come to the Earth to run wild. Looking at the news on the outdoor TV, Yehu's eyes twinkled. 2 people were assassinated in the hotel. This should be the prince in the plot. Yehu remembered that the Milky Way was on the cat, and came to the hotel according to the address described in the news. He walked around the store but did not see the cat. He used telepathy to control a police officer and obtained the autopsy room from the other party's position. Half an hour later, Yehu came outside the autopsy room. He looked at the classic cars parked on the street and walked straight to a nearby cafe to sit down. 5 minutes later, 2 men in black came out arguing. Yehu placed a Franklin on the table. He got up and left the cafe and entered the morgue through the back door. He used telekinesis to put the orange cat running around in his arms and tease it for a while, then took out the Milky Way and put it in his backpack. Little guy, you are too skinny and not cute at all. Yehu gently threw Orion to the ground, smiled at the female coroner, used his mental power to erase her memory of him, and left the morgue through the back door towards the expo where 2 spaceships were parked. As soon as K and J returned to the headquarters of the Men in Black, they received a message from the Aquilonian spacecraft. Everyone's pupils shrank when they saw the laser emitted by the spaceship in the picture. The next second, a colorful light beam directly hit the laser crush. At the same time, Odin's projection appeared in the Aquilonian spaceship. The commander of the spacecraft quickly stepped forward and whispered, "Dear Lord Odin, we have no intention of provoking Asgard, we just want to take it back. Something that belongs to us. I'll give you 1 hour to get out of the solar system or die." Odin's cold words made the commander tremble. The other party was also a famous existence in the universe. They did not expect that this time they would attract the other party's attention. "Your Majesty Commander, what should we do?" The deputy came to the commander's side and asked in a low voice. He looked at the dark screen and the commander gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "Send a notice to Earth. Let them find the Milky Way within an hour or else bear the consequences." The deputy hesitated before sending the message. K and J chased the Zerg to the expo. Yehu sat on a treetop and watched the two fighting against the Zerg. "It will be there in an hour," K shouted loudly. "Hurry up and hand over the galaxy. Otherwise the Aquilonians will destroy the Earth with their main guns." The Zerg stopped for a moment and did not expect that the Aquilonians would be so crazy. They roared in a low voice, "I didn't get the Milky Way." Seeing K being swallowed and then blasting the Zerg into pieces from the inside, Yehu shook his head and whispered, "This is the result of eating indiscriminately. Sun Wukong used this trick to subdue many powerful monsters." The commander looked at the final countdown and cursed in his native language in a low voice, and asked his men to start a space jump to leave the solar system. Z from the headquarters of the Men in Black shouted excitedly, thinking that it was K's old lover, Queen Sada, who intervened. After watching Edwards use the memory eraser to erase K's memory, Yehu turned around and left the park. The next day, the newspaper reported the news of a man who had been in a coma for 35 years and returned to his girlfriend's arms. He looked at the sweet look of the two in the newspaper. The corners of Agent J's mouth raised slightly. Walking towards Stark Manor early the next morning, a voice came out when approaching the gate. "Sorry sir, this is private property and you have no right to access it. I want to see Miss Pepperpotts. I have news about Mr. Stark." Jarvis scanned Yehu's face and found no useful information, so he finally reported the situation to Potts. "I heard that you have news about Stark? Is this true?" Potts's voice reached Yehu's ears through the loudspeaker. Listening to the anxiety in the other person's tone, Yehu raised the corners of his mouth slightly, spread his hands and whispered, "Don't you invite me to come in and sit down? We can have a chat." Jarvis gives him temporary authority. Potts said softly after giving the instructions, "I need half an hour to come back. Please wait." "It's okay, I'm not in a hurry." Yehu strode into the manor and looked at the luxurious decorations around him with a flash of envy in his eyes. The life of the rich was so simple and boring. Half an hour later, Potts ran to the living room with an anxious look on his face. Happy followed him and looked at Yehu warily. He didn't dare to let Potts see anyone alone and he was a man. If something happened, Stark would go crazy. "Hello, Mr. Yi. I'm sorry that there was a traffic jam on the road and kept you waiting for a long time." Potts smiled and stretched out his hand to shake Yehu's hand. Then he motioned Happy to get a bottle of red wine. The two sat down face to face. Yehu said calmly. The Ten Rings Gang is a terrorist organization committed to destroying world peace at all costs. The leader of the opponent, the Mandarin, is a very powerful being. The 10 rings on his hands have different abilities. Looking at the confused Potts, Yehu said softly, "Mr. Stark was kidnapped by him. I got the news that he is being held in a valley and is not in danger for the time being. Mr. Yi, please, save Tony." Potts had an anxious look on his face. Yehu rolled his eyes and felt that he might have said something a little implicitly. He coughed lightly and continued, "You can save him, but you have to pay more." "Okay. As long as you can rescue Tony, money is not a problem." Bosie's eyes were full of determination and he looked like he was not short of money. Yehu nodded and said softly, "Arrange a plane to take me there. Afghanistan, and then you can wait for news." Just then Bosie's phone suddenly rang. Looking at the name above, Bosie's eyes showed a glimmer of hope and he quickly answered the phone. "Rhodey, have you found Tony yet?" Colonel Rhodey opened his mouth and said apologetically, "We have found out that the person who kidnapped Tony was an organization called the Ten Rings Gang, and we are now searching for their traces." "Okay, I get it. If you have news about Tony, please inform me as soon as possible." Bosie hung up the phone with a very gloomy face. If she hadn't been worried that the other party was Tony's friend, she would have scolded her. She found out in 2 days an organization name. The news I got is not as much as she knows. Bosie decided not to rely on the military anymore and pinned all his hopes on Yehu. After getting on the plane, several flight attendants slowly came closer. Although Yehu was wearing ordinary clothes, the fact that he could borrow Stark's private jet was enough to prove that the other party's identity was not simple and that they didn't mind having something happen with him. Yehu was completely uninterested in these people. 2 hours later, the plane entered the sky over Afghanistan. Yihu jumped out of the plane with a parachute on his back. A line was immediately projected on the watch. An hour later, Yihu arrived at the location where Stark was attacked, allowing Jarvis to display the locations of all surrounding valleys. Chapter 14 Escape. Yihu searched little by little according to the location marked on the map, and finally found a gathering place in the 6th valley. He stood on the valley and looked down at the crowd below. After comparing the environment, I made sure that I was not looking in the wrong place. I randomly found a position with the wind and lay down. I was ready to make some repairs. Anyway, it was not a bad night. At this time, Tony was hitting the steel plate vigorously with a hammer. These operations were previously done for him by a robotic arm, but now he had to do it manually. If he hadn't been exercising regularly, he would have been dumbfounded. How come what he did is different from the one on the drawing? A bearded man in the monitoring room raised his doubts while holding a photo of the Jellicoe missile and comparing it to the model in the camera. In order to show off in front of his companions, the man next to him pointed at the model in the camera and whispered, "It won't look the same if you turn it around." After hearing what his companion said, the bearded man compared it carefully and found that it was indeed similar from the other side. He shook his head and ignored it. He called a companion who did not gamble and asked him to stare at the screen. Then he and the other two started the only entertainment activity in this place. 10 minutes later, the bearded man whispered, "What is Stark doing?" "Working." The big man in charge of monitoring replied casually. Although he couldn't understand the models, he could tell that Stark was forging iron. In his mind, forging iron equaled work. What should I do? Dr. Ethan looked at the display screen and was at a loss. Facing this brand new thing, all he could do was take action. In actual operation, he had to listen to Stark. Just now, 2 terrorists who came to check the situation were killed by a bomb made by Stark, and Ethan was very nervous. Just press the F11 key and wait for the progress bar to appear, then press enter. Now come here and help me tighten the screws. Stark tried to keep his tone calm so as not to irritate the nervous Dr. Ethan. After tightening the screws, Ethan looked back at the progress bar halfway through, with a hint of determination on his face, and said in a deep voice, "They are coming, we need more time, I will buy you some time." "Wait. Ethan. Come as planned. Come back quickly." Stark shouted loudly, and a scientist took an AK to fight the terrorists desperately. Stark could not think of any other ending except death. Ethan picked up the gun on the ground, screamed and rushed out. Bullets kept firing at the top of his head. The 3 terrorists who came to check the situation screamed and ran towards the back. Ethan chased out of the passage and saw a dozen guns aimed at him. The faces of his family flashed in his mind. He gritted his teeth and leveled the muzzle of the gun, preparing to launch the final attack. He pulled the trigger to the end, but the imaginary gunshot did not appear. The leader of the 10 Rings gang looked away with disdain, took out his pistol and shot Ethan several times in the chest. The bullet stopped in front of Ethan. Everyone was stunned by the scene. Yihu put his hands in his trouser pockets and fell from the sky. He set off when he heard the explosion just now. Fortunately, he didn't miss it, otherwise he would have felt hot to hold the money. The little head touched the ring in his hand and said in a bad tone, "This is the territory of the 10 Rings gang. Please consider this mutant brother carefully whether he wants to go against us." Dozens of members of the 10 Rings gang held chargers and faced Yihu indifferently, seeming to shoot at the slightest disagreement. Tony, who drove the armor to the entrance of the cave, saw the little leader subconsciously raised his left hand and pressed the red button on it, firing a small cannonball at the opponent. The little leader of the 10 Rings gang quickly squatted down to avoid the attack of the cannonball, but there was no steel protecting him. He soon fell in a pool of blood. The surrounding members of the 10 Rings gang immediately began to fire. But all the bullets were stopped in the air by Yihu's telekinesis. It was not until the magazine was empty that everyone came back to their senses and looked at Yihu in horror. "Miss Pepper asked me to rescue you. But it seems you don't need it anymore." Yihu shrugged and retreated to the entrance of the cave, making a gesture of invitation to Stark. "Why didn't I know Potts had mutant friends? I can handle this all by myself." Stark piloted the mecha and rushed towards the frightened 10 Rings gang members, punching them out of the cave one by one. He stretched out his hand to push away his mask and looked at Yihu with a stern look. "Then it depends on your performance. I can help you take care of him, but I have to give you the money as usual. I won't let you go even if you lose a penny." Yihu pointed at Ethan, who was looking at him blankly. Tucker looked at his mecha and then at the mortal Ethan, nodded and said proudly, "Money is not an issue." After saying that, he closed his visor and jumped out of the cave. Yehu ignored the panting little boss and reached out to grab Ethan's shoulders and walked toward the cave entrance. Watching with interest, the Iron Man, who was spraying flames from his hands, was suppressed by the terrorists with a machine gun. Feeling the shock coming from his body, Tony showed a trace of unwillingness on his face. The next second, the ammunition piled up around him began to explode, and the smoke and dust flying in the sky obscured the sight of the machine gunner. Tony took the opportunity to stand up and press the button on his left hand. 2 streams of flames spurted out from the tail of the mecha, pushing the mecha into the sky. What an enviable guy! Yehu shook his head and wrapped Ethan with his mental power and flew towards the place where Tony fell. Stark slowly took off the broken breastplate, stood up unsteadily and let out a long sigh of relief as he looked at the fragments on the ground. If the ammunition hadn't exploded in time, he would have been killed by the machine gun. At this moment, a voice came from behind him. "What a good performance!" As expected of Tony. Yehu slowly clapped his palms. Tony frowned and felt that what the other party just said was somewhat malicious. Soon Potts's projection appeared in Yehu's eyes. On the watch, Tony, who looked a little embarrassed, whispered, "Tony, I'm glad you're all right." "Potts." Tony was a little surprised when he saw the sudden appearance of the projection. Yehu ignored the two's reminiscing and said to himself, "The explosion here has attracted the attention of the military. If nothing else, the other party will be there in half an hour." Arriving here. Hearing Yehu's words, Stark felt relieved. What he was most afraid of was that no one would notice what was going on here. In that case, he would probably die in this desert. Yehu handed the kettle hanging on his waist to Stark and whispered, "I don't want to deal with the military. You have 2 options now. First, I will leave some supplies and you 2 will wait here for rescue. Second 2, leave with me and take the plane arranged by Miss Potts." Stark glanced at Yehu and whispered, "I choose one." He believed in his old friend Roddy more than Yehu when he met him for the first time. Yehu nodded and threw his backpack to Stark. He took out his phone and dialed a number and said softly, "The man has been rescued. Book a flight for me." Hey. I obviously escaped on my own." Hearing Tony's voice, Potts shouted excitedly, "Tony! I'm so glad you're okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Yi. I'll send you the money right away." Potts' tone was full of gratitude. Tony became unhappy instantly. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Yehu's retreating back. Chapter 15 Stark Industries. Yehu went to the nearest airport, revealed his identity, and got on the plane chartered by Potts for him. 3 hours later, Yehu returned home and looked at the 1 billion in his account, with a bright smile on his face. He planned to use the money to buy Sri Lanka. The stock of Tucker Industries can lie on Tony's body to suck blood in the future. Obadiah Stan stood at the door of the press conference to greet Tony. The 2 came to the podium one after another. Stark slowly sat on the ground, raised his hands and whispered, "Sit down, everyone, so I don't have to look up at you." A group of reporters slowly squatted down and listened to Stark describe what he saw and heard. 2 minutes later, Stark finished his speech and stood up and said in a calm tone, "I have decided to close the weapons department of Stark Industries. Until we find a new development direction for the company." A trace of surprise flashed across the reporter's face, and before they could ask anything, Stark squeezed out of the crowd, and Obadiah Stan raised his hands in the air and shouted loudly, "What we should focus on now is that Tony is back and very healthy." The reporters did not pay attention to each other's words. The news that Stark just said would definitely make the newspaper sell out. 10 minutes later, Obadiah Stan walked out of the press conference with a dark face and rode a balance bike to Area 16. There was a super-large arc shock reactor placed here. Obadiah swiped his ID card on the access control with a gloomy face. "Look at what a good job you did. How much do you think the stock price will drop tomorrow?" Obadiah unbuttoned his suit and looked furious. Tony spread his hands and said casually, "It will probably drop 40. Just a little bit." Obadiah took off the snow lotus from his mouth and said seriously, "Tony, although we make arms, we are doing this to maintain world peace. Only powerful firepower can deter those villains." "Obadiah, I don't want to make money by killing people. The weapons I made will be used by terrorists to attack the people they are supposed to protect." Tony's eyes flashed with pain, and Obadiah's heart skipped a beat. After experiencing some setbacks, this puppet is no longer easy to fool. Just as he was thinking about the new poisonous chicken soup, Tony Stark suddenly pointed at the reactor in front of him and said softly, "I am ready to develop new energy sources." Obadiah looked up at the huge arc reactor and said speechlessly, "This thing is just a decoration. We knew before manufacturing it that it would not be able to repay the cost. And there has been no breakthrough in this technology for many years. That was before." A faint smile appeared on Tony Stark's lips, and he gently unbuttoned his shirt to reveal the arc reactor on his chest. Obadiah looked at Tony's chest and then at the giant figure beside him. "Reactor," with a look of surprise on his face. "Isn't this a nuisance?" Hearing this, Obadiah put a smile on his face and hugged Stark's shoulders, whispering, "Tony, we are a team. As long as we work together, there is nothing we can't do. Just like your father and I did. From now on, can you please stop doing this first and then talk about it?" "Okay, I'm sorry for not telling you what I thought ahead of time." Stark showed a hint of helplessness on his face. What he hated most was this kind of preaching. Obadiah patted Tony on the shoulder and whispered, "Let me settle this matter. We are going to make a new transformation. Promise." "I must keep a low profile recently." Tony nodded insincerely, and the two left Area 16 talking and laughing. After returning to the villa, Stark locked himself in the basement and began to improve the arc shock reactor. Yehu, who was cooking in the kitchen, heard the news on TV about Stark closing the weapons department. A flash of joy flashed in his eyes. He dropped the shovel and took out his mobile phone to start buying stocks. Yehu's eyes were gleaming, and his mind was filled with thoughts of a better life in the future. Suddenly, a burning smell came from the kitchen. "Oh, shit! My omelette!" Yehu shouted and ran to the kitchen, but in the end he failed to save his lunch. At the same time, Stark asked Potts to install the new reactor into his chest. Looking at Stark's fiery gaze, Potts was a little overwhelmed. The other person's completely trusting attitude made her feel a little pressure and installed the reactor. After she recovered, her back was already wet with sweat. "What are you going to do with this thing?" "Of course I threw it away. Among my many advantages, nostalgia is not one of them." Tony Stark waved his hand in a very casual tone, and Potts played with the reactor reluctantly. This was a manifestation of Tony's trust in her and she didn't want to throw it away. After Potts left, Stark changed his clothes, drove a sports car and left the villa through the underground exit, and sped all the way to a military base to find Roddy, hoping to get him to support his new energy research. "What you have to do now is to calm down." Roddy looked at Stark and said seriously, "I'm serious." A smile appeared on Stark's face and his eyes gradually became firmer after the other party left. Although his friend Roddy did not understand his approach, it did not affect his will. "Jarvis, create a new folder immediately and name it Mark II." Returning to the villa, Stark began to improve the previous mecha. An hour later, Stark installed mechanical shells on the limbs and began to study how to fly. At the same time, the small leader of the Ten Rings gang led a group of people to search for the mechas dropped by Stark in the desert, preparing to assemble them according to the design drawings. "Found it!" A member of the Ten Rings gang held up a piece of visor and waved at the little leader. The little leader with a scar on his head looked at the raised facial mecha with a smile on his lips. "Sir, I think you should use a computer to simulate taking off first. Practice is the best simulation." Stark put on the helmet and said in a relaxed tone, "Get ready, start." As soon as he finished speaking, the thrusters on his legs ignited quickly. The next second, Tony turned into a white light and rushed out of the basement and flew into the sky. Looking at the dark sky, Stark felt that he was free at this moment. He decided to test the mecha. Flight altitude. "Sir, the outer surface of the mecha may freeze severely and cause damage." "Continue," Stark said calmly. At this moment, he had the illusion that he could fly out of the earth. As the distance increased, the surface of the mecha began to freeze, and the thrusters flickered a few times before completely extinguishing. "Oh, no! Jarvis! Spread the ailerons!" Tony screamed and fell from the sky. He began to fumble with his hands and finally manually opened the ailerons to shatter the ice on his body. Jarvis also came back online at this time, controlled the mecha to ignite and flew into the sky again. After some traveling, Stark returned to the villa. But because he miscalculated the weight of the mech and fell directly from the second floor into the basement, Tony covered his head with ice and walked to the computer to record the data. Chapter 16 Ambition. When passing by the desk, a wrapped gift caught Tony's attention. When he opened it, he found that it was the old reactor he asked Potts to deal with. Tony has a warm heart. Looking at the words engraved on it, a smile appeared on Tony's lips, and he slowly sat on the sofa. At this moment, Jarvis projected a model into the air. "Sir, what do you think of this color?" Looking at the red gold mecha, Tony raised his eyebrows and whispered, "The color is too dazzling, let's add some red to it." "Yes sir." Tony looked at the golden and red mecha on the projection with a satisfied smile. At this time, the news began to report that he was bedridden. Tony felt a little moved when he saw the figure flashing across the screen. "Sir, it takes about 5 hours to paint." "Okay, no need to wait for me." Tony picked up his watch and checked the time and turned to walk towards the sports car. He decided to go see Potts. Half an hour later, Tony arrived at the venue. Carlson immediately leaned forward and wanted to make an appointment with him to understand the whole story. Yeah. Everything you said is right. I'll go find my assistant to arrange a time." Tony couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful figure in the distance. The blue backless dress Potts wore perfectly highlighted the curves of his body. Coulson, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he bet Stark wasn't listening to him just now. But his years of experience as an agent still allowed him to squeeze out a smile and shake Stark's hand, watching the other person walk towards Potts and then dance in the center of the stage. The two hugged each other tightly, and each could hear each other's heartbeat. Halfway through the dance, Tony suggested going to the balcony to enjoy the breeze, and Potts readily agreed. When they came to the balcony, driven by the atmosphere, the two closed their eyes and slowly approached each other. When they were about to kiss, they opened their eyes at the same time. Potts lowered his head shyly, and Stark was also a little at a loss. At this moment, he didn't look like a wanderer at all. A veteran of flowers. "I want to have something to drink." Potts lowered his head and whispered. This scene was not the kissing place she desired in her heart. Stark nodded and walked towards the ballroom. Watching the other party's leaving figure, Potts felt empty in his heart. Stark came to the bar and handed the bartender a Franklin card and stated Potts' request. While waiting, a beautiful figure walked towards him quickly. Stark turned sideways in a panic to avoid the other person's sight. "Hi, Tony." Stark's expression was a little stiff and he whispered, "Carly. My name is Christine." A trace of embarrassment flashed across Tony's face, and Christine took out a stack of photos and said disdainfully, "You said at the press conference that you were going to close the weapons department, but what are these? This town is called Gemilla, have you heard of it?" "What?" Stark took the photo with a blank look on his face. Looking at the weapons with the Stark Industries icon in the photo, his face gradually darkened. He remembered that Ethan's hometown was called Gemilla. "I didn't approve the shipment." "But your company approved it." Faced with Christine's question, Stark said in a serious tone, "The company's agreement does not mean that I agree." After that, he walked to the door with the photo. When he came in before, Obadiah was being interviewed at the door. "What's going on with these photos? What's going on with Mila? Why do you do this kind of thing secretly?" Tony looked at Obadiah with an angry face. At this moment, several reporters asked the two to take a photo. Taking advantage of the photo opportunity, Obadiah whispered in Tony's ear, "Who do you think kicked you out? I approved the weapons, only in this way can I protect you." Tony stood on the red carpet and stared at Obadiah's leaving figure with dull eyes. He felt very uncomfortable and couldn't understand why the other party did this. He had promised to accompany him to transform the company. Stark returned to the villa in a daze, completely forgetting that there was another person waiting for him on the balcony. He sat alone on the sofa in the research room, adjusting the mecha on his hand while watching the news about Gemilla on TV. Those innocent civilians died under the weapons he made. Stark's eyes gradually turned cold. Especially the familiar little leader of the Ten Rings gang in the camera. He thought he died in the explosion, but he didn't expect that he not only survived, but also went to Ethan's hometown to wreak havoc. He didn't dare to tell the laboratory about this. "Ethan within." Stark stood up and came to the TV. He raised his right hand and a burst of energy gathered in his palm and was fired out by him. After breaking all the glass in the laboratory, he came to a platform and began to put on the mecha. He started flying at high speed along the positioning sent by Jarvis. He just wanted to tear the terrorists into pieces and destroy the weapons in their hands. An hour later, Stark fell from the sky in front of everyone's horrified eyes. Several terrorists screamed and fired with AK. Looking at the sparks bursting from the mecha, a trace of fear flashed on their faces, and then they were taken away by a palm cannon. The remaining terrorists quickly grabbed the weapons beside them. Civilians stand in front of themselves. The scorched smell in the air reminded them of the power of the palm cannon. Seeing the robot put down its hands, a trace of joy flashed on several of their faces. Before they could say anything harsh, 2 small launchers appeared on the back of the mecha. Headshot. The team leader who was responsible for capturing Tony Stark hid behind the wall and called the boss. Before he could say anything, he was grabbed by a mechanical arm through the wall and thrown to the ground. Listening to the noise on the phone, the little boss, as soon as his expression changed, he immediately asked someone to bring weapons and go to the temporary base for support. He does as you please. As soon as he finished speaking, Stark flew into the sky again. Suddenly, a model of a cannonball appeared inside the visor. After an explosion, Stark fell from the sky. He looked at the mecha climbing out of the hole and the lookout who was watching in the tank. Shouting loudly, Stark turned sideways to avoid a cannonball, raised his right hand and fired a small rocket. He turned and walked away. The hero never looked back at the explosion. Flying into the sky with bullets fired to increase the energy supply of the palm cannon, 2 crimson light beams blew up the terrorists' weapons depot. The little boss was sitting on the pickup truck looking at the mushroom cloud in front of him, his face was very gloomy. At an Air Force base in California, an officer pointed at the red dot on the instrument and whispered, "What is this? Have you got our permission? Call the CIA and ask if they are performing a mission." Not from the Air Force or from the CIA. Not the Navy and not the Marines. After hearing the answer from his subordinates, the officer said solemnly, "Go and call Colonel Rhodey from the Weapons Development Department." Why is there no response on the radar? Is it stealth technology? Rhodey slowly walked to the radar display. The soldier on the side quickly said, "No, sir, its radar reflective surface is too small so it cannot be displayed." After a moment of silence, Rhodey took out his phone and dialed Stark. Since it was not from the military, all he could think of was the other party. Chapter 17 Researching Mechas. "Hey, Tony." "What?" Louder. Rhodey covered his ears with his hands and said in a deep voice, "What are you doing? Why is the noise so loud?" "I'm driving a convertible sports car," Tony said casually, and Roddy whispered, "I need your help with something. We discovered a UFO. Tell me honestly, have you developed any high-tech weapons recently?" "No." "That's good, I'm staring at a UFO now and preparing to destroy it." Tony hung up the phone and accelerated suddenly in an attempt to get away from the 2 fighter jets behind him. The pilot's voice came from the command room. "The whip number 1 has arrived at the designated location and discovered a UFO. Can we establish contact with the other party?" The commander had the idea of peaceful communication in his mind. Not just anyone can create a weapon capable of destroying a terrorist base. "No, sir." "Okay, then you can attack." After receiving the order, the pilot launched a missile. Upon seeing this, Stark immediately fired an incendiary bomb to detonate the missile in advance. After a chase, Stark hid in the belly of a fighter jet and dialed Roddy's phone number. "Hey guy. What's wrong, Tony?" "Sorry, the flying object you just asked about was me." Tony's cheeks were slightly red. He just thought that with his excellent skills, the 2 fighter jets could not see his tail lights, but his speed was not as fast as the fighter jets. It made him very embarrassed. "Don't be kidding, Tony, this is not a game, you can't put civilian equipment into the battlefield." Roddy's tone was very serious. If this was found out, he would be convicted. Tony Stark hugged the plane tightly and said anxiously, "That's not a civilian device. It's a mechanical shell. I'm in it." The colonel on the side looked at Rhodey's changing face and asked in a low voice, "Do you have any information?" "Roddy." Just when Roddy was hesitant to tell the other party, the pilot accidentally discovered Stark hiding under his teammate's plane and quickly informed his teammate to spin the plane in an attempt to throw him off. After a burst of high-speed rotation, Stark was thrown and just hit the fighter waiting to attack behind him. After an explosion, the pilot took a parachute and fell extremely fast. Looking at the pilot who has never opened the parachute, Stark rushed out of the cloud to rescue the other party. "Report to command, the target appears again. Lock him. Then destroy it." The commander's tone was very cold. He was very hurt by the loss of a fighter jet. Roddy beside him whispered, "Colonel, why don't you let the plane withdraw? Shenbian number 2 immediately locks onto the opponent and shoots it down. Roddy on the side opened his mouth and was about to say something when he heard the excited voice of the pilot of Shenbian number 1, he opened the parachute for me. The pilot of Divine Whip 2 recovered the launcher and took the initiative to reduce the speed. The other party saved his teammates and it was worth letting him go. Everyone in the command room cheered for the pilot of Divine Whip 1. Only the colonel was dejected. Originally, as long as he shot down the UFO, a little loss would not affect his results, but now he has to bear the blame. Just as the colonel was about to speak, Loridi went into the water when he saw the other party pick up his mobile phone and walk aside. Stark's voice came from the phone. "Thanks man. You bastard owe me a plane." No, strictly speaking, he bumped into me. "Do you want to see my research?" "No, I don't want to at all." Rhodey rejected Tony's invitation with righteous words, and the other party's bad character would definitely be ridiculed if he went by himself. Thinking of the damaged plane, Rhodey said a little unhappily, "How do you ask me to explain to the media that such a big thing happened? Let's just talk about drills and training. Isn't this how you usually fool them?" Listening to Tony's relaxed tone, Roddy said angrily, "What you said is light-hearted. It's not you who writes the report anyway." Early the next morning, Yehu ate toast and watched Roddy on TV seriously talking about the unfortunate destruction of a Raptor fighter due to a mistake in an actual combat exercise. He also claimed that the Gemila incident was not caused by the government and that the military would vigorously search for that unknown group of forces. "I'm full." Jessica wiped her hands with a tissue, picked up the briefcase on the side and walked out the door. Just yesterday, the other party received a commission to investigate her husband's extramarital affair. Now Jessica is in the middle of excited state. Obadiah picked up the phone while watching the news on TV, looked at the contact on it and frowned slightly. The words of the head of the Ten Rings gang came over the phone, claiming that he had discovered the original mecha and wanted to use it. It made a deal with itself, and after some conversation, Obadiah had a sneer on his face. Potts slowly walked into the research room below and looked at the broken glass on the ground. He was shocked and quickly walked into the research room. Looking at Tony who was dismantling the mecha, he covered his mouth and said in disbelief, "What are you doing? Are those bullet holes in your body?" "Ahem, don't panic." Seeing Stark's careless look, Potts put down the documents in her hands and turned towards the stairs. It was obvious that the other party had forgotten what happened on the balcony, and she was going to go upstairs to drink some drinks to suppress her anger. The next day, Obadiah took his bodyguards on a human plane to the gathering place of the Ten Rings gang. The little leader smiled and hugged him, and said softly, "You can come in, but they have to stay." Obadiah raised his hand to stop the bodyguard's movements, made a gesture with his left hand behind his back, and followed the little boss into the tent. Looking at the mechas on display, Obadiah reached out and groped for the hole in the mecha's chest. The arc reactor on Stark's chest flashed through his mind. Thinking about the power of the mecha, he felt that his plan could be advanced. Who in this world with money and power could stop him? "I can give you the design of this mecha. In return, I hope you can give me a group of iron soldiers." A glint flashed in the little boss's eyes, and he said crazily, "I only need 20 of these mechas. I can rule all of Asia." Imagining a blush flashing across the face of the little boss of the mushroom cloud he had seen before, Obadiah slowly put on his earplugs and took out the nerve paralysis device, patted the little boss who could not move and said disdainfully, "I will only give you this gift. Technology will always be the weakness of illiterates like you." Obadiah strode out of the tent, looked at the paralyzed terrorist, and said softly, "Take away the mecha and the data in the computer, and then clean up the garbage." After a burst of gunfire, there was no one left alive in the entire camp. Obadiah sat in the car and took out his phone and whispered, "Set up a secret laboratory under the arc reactor and call the best engineers to shrink it for me." Chapter 18 Exposure. Potts, who was processing documents in the villa, suddenly received a notice from Jarvis asking her to go to the research room below. When she heard the door open, Tony put down the tools in her hands and looked sideways at Potts, saying in a relaxed tone, "Are you busy? I need you to go to my office and hack into the computer host to get back all the recent shipping lists. This is a password chip, just plug it into the computer." Potts reached out and took something the size of a USB flash drive, and said hesitantly, "What are you going to do if I get the list back?" "Same as before, if it is a secret deal, I will destroy all the weapons." Potts sighed with a wry smile on his face, and said in a choked tone, "Tony, you know, I am willing to do anything for you. If you want to act like last time, then I can't help you. Thinking of Potts standing in front of her wearing a mecha full of bullet holes a few days ago, she felt so heartbroken that she couldn't breathe. She didn't want Tony to have an accident. I just want the list. I promised to close the weapons department, I have to do it. Stark looked at Bosi with unprecedented firmness in his eyes. Really? Then I resign. Potts threw down the password chip, feeling like a joke. The other party didn't even care about her. At this moment, she felt a little tired. You have been by my side for so many years. You didn't leave when I was making money by killing people with weapons, but now you are leaving me when I want to protect the civilians who suffered because of me. Potts stopped and turned to look at the tearful Tony. And said helplessly, this will kill you, I can't push you to death. Tony no longer concealed his inner feelings, and sat on the chair and said softly, Potts, I'm not crazy. I just found my mission, and I think it's the right thing to do. At this moment, Stark seemed to be exuding the brilliance of divinity. Potts understood that no matter what she did, she could not stop him. Since she could not stop him, she would face him with him. Thinking of this, Potts sighed softly and turned around. Pick up the password chip on the table. You know what? You are everything to me too. Stark looked up at the tender Potts, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised and feeling warm in his heart. An hour later, Potts stepped off the elevator and looked around nervously, then walked quickly to Stark's office and found that there was no one there. The Queen breathed a sigh of relief. Sitting on a chair, she plugged the USB flash drive in her hand into the computer and started looking for the shipping manifest. Potts' eyes flashed slightly when she looked at the mecha research information on the computer. When she saw the video of the terrorists kidnapping Tony, she translated the language. After discovering the transaction between Obadiah and the other party, his face changed instantly. Quickly downloaded the file, and at this moment Obadiah pushed the door open. A trace of astonishment flashed across his face when he saw Potts, and then he said with a smile, What do you think we should do now? Obadiah walked to the wine cabinet, poured a glass of wine, looked at Bosi's nervous look, a trace of suspicion flashed across his face, but soon turned into a smile. He thought the other party was so awkward because of Tony's matter. What's happened to Tony lately? Good. Potts forced a smile on his face, and covered the USB drive with a newspaper while Obadiah lowered his head to make drinks. Obadiah picked up 2 glasses of wine and walked towards Potts. Looking at the unchanged computer screen, he breathed a sigh of relief, and casually put a glass of wine beside Potts. I feel like Tony is a different person. He lost his soul in that cave. I'm very sad. Sitting on the desk, Obadiah somewhat missed the one who worked hard and kept improving weapons. Tony Stark. He is a bit unpredictable. He has experienced too many things, but I believe he will get better. Potts said with a smile on his face. You are such a rare woman. Tony doesn't know how lucky he is. Obadiah took a sip of his drink, his voice was very low, and he was a little envious that Tony, a playboy, could meet such a considerate woman. Thanks for the compliment, I have to go back. Potts nodded with a smile on his face, stood up and took the newspaper, held the USB flash drive in his hand and walked quickly to the door. Obadiah said in a deep voice, Is that today's newspaper? Yes. Potts' body tensed slightly, and Obadiah walked up to Potts and said softly, Would you mind giving it to me? I really like the word puzzle above. Of course I don't mind. Potts nodded stiffly, and Obadiah took the newspaper and whispered, Thank you, go slowly. Potts, who walked out of the gate, looked back after hearing this, but walked quickly to the elevator without saying anything. Obadiah felt that Potts was a little strange today, and subconsciously went back to the computer. Word invasion. Surprised, he quickly chased him out, and Potts rushed all the way to the first floor. Seeing this, Coulson, who was waiting on the sofa, quickly stepped forward and said softly, Miss Potts, we made an appointment, have you forgotten? Looking at the familiar Mediterranean hairstyle, Potts said coldly, I haven't forgotten. Come with me. Let's go to the office to talk. Potts felt a lot more at ease when he had more people beside him. Although Obadiah's body could beat 5 skinny guys like Coulson, at least the other party could delay the time for him to call for help. Coulson on the side has no idea that he has become a shield, and is simulating a conversation in his mind at the moment. This task has been delayed for a long time, and if he doesn't complete it, the director will have opinions on himself, and there is no need for promotion and salary increase after thinking about it. He was so anxious that he lost several hairs because of this task, and now it can finally be over. Obadiah stood on the second floor and looked at the two people leaving with calm eyes. His hesitant heart immediately calmed down. He turned around and walked towards Area 16. He looked at the busy scientists and said in a deep voice. How's the research going? Sorry. Sir, this task seems a little difficult. The energy supply technology for this armor has not yet appeared. Difficulty? What do you mean by not showing up? Obadiah looked at William in amusement, pointed at the giant arc reactor and roared angrily, the sample is right here. I just asked you to shrink it. Even Stark can be in the cave. Made out of a bunch of junk. I'm sorry, sir, I'm not Tony Stark. Obadiah looked at William who was breaking the jar, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He didn't know what to say for a moment, and waved his hand to tell the other person to get out. Obadiah drives a car to Tony Stark's villa, and he wants to control him and seize the arc reactor before everything is irreversible. Arriving at the gate of the villa, Obadiah stepped forward cautiously. After Jarvis completed the scan, he whispered. Welcome to Mr. Obadiah, do you need to inform Mr. Stark for you? No, Jarvis, I want to give him a surprise. Obadiah put his hand into his pocket and rubbed the nerve paralysis device vigorously. Chapter 19 The fog clears. Tony came to the first floor from the basement and came to the sofa looking for the ringing phone. Looking at the picture of Potts on the screen, the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. As soon as the connection was connected, before he could speak, he was subdued by the nerve paralysis device. Obadiah slowly picked up the phone in Tony's hand and hung up, saying in a calm tone. Remember this gadget, right? It's a pity that the government didn't approve its production. When I ordered you to be killed, I was still worried that I was killing a hen that would lay golden eggs. Obadiah took out an instrument from the box on the side and put it on his hand. He took off the arc reactor from Stark's chest and said softly, You escaped with your life, but you also gave me the last piece of gold. Egg. I will use it to control the world. Obadiah put the arc reactor into the box, stood up and walked towards the door of the villa. After the other party left, Stark struggled to stand up and walk stiffly towards the elevator to the basement. The moment he opened the door, he fell to the ground. Stark crawled hard to the table with the old reactor. Potts, who hung up the phone, quickly called Roddy and asked him to go to the villa to see Tony. I need your help. Potts turned and looked at Coulson with a hint of pleading in her eyes. She did not dare to use the company's security because Obadiah's prestige in the company was higher than that of her as a personal secretary. No problem, ma'am. Coulson nodded seriously, took out his phone and called a team of 5 people. He was confident that he could easily take down a mere bald guy. After receiving the news, Rhodey drove the car quickly to the villa. After some operations, Stark lay on the ground, looking ahead with blurred eyes. At this moment, a mechanical arm handed the glass box containing the reactor to him. Good boy. As soon as he finished speaking, Stark grabbed the box with his right hand, turned over and smashed it to the ground, put the reactor back on his chest with shaking hands, and then lay on the ground to recover his strength. Obadiah stood in front of the mecha he created with the reactor in his hand. The desire to control the world in his heart became stronger. No man could refuse the mecha. Obadiah put the reactor into the mecha's chest. Turning around to operate the computer to check all aspects of data, Potts took a shortcut to Area 16 to prepare for a surprise attack, but her ID card could not open the door to the research room. Miss Potts, please step back. Coulson held a mini-bomb and placed it on the iron door. Upon seeing this, Potts hurriedly ran away from the door. After a soft sound, the door was shaken open, and Russia, who was checking the information, Badia quickly entered the mecha. Tony! Tony, where are you? Roddy rushed into the villa and ran all the way to the research room. Looking at Tony lying motionless on the ground with a sad look on his face, he squatted down and just touched the other person's body when he heard Tony say weakly. Poots, how's it going? She's fine. 5 agents are accompanying her to capture Obadiah. 5 people are not enough. Stark stood up and walked to the dressing platform. A set of gorgeous mecha was put on his body by a mechanical arm. He strolled to the place where he fell last time and whispered to Rhodey, start taking action. Go. Remember to clear the sky. As soon as he finished speaking, Stark smashed through the ceiling and flew into the sky in Roddy's envious eyes. He glanced at the unpainted mecha beside him. Roddy swallowed and whispered. I will definitely drive you away next time. After saying that, he turned around and entered a sports car, which was much cooler than his pickup truck. Carlson and others slowly approached the bottom floor of Area 16, looked at the initial model and whispered, "It seems you are right, he also made it a suit of armor." Potts thought about the memory in his mind and said softly, "I think it should be bigger." Looking at the slightly swaying chain in the distance, Potts frowned slightly. When an agent passed by the computer, he looked at the data inside and carefully took out a USB flash drive. Just as he was about to copy the data, Potts screamed. As soon as he turned around, he saw a flash of bright silver and then his consciousness fell into a deep sleep. Potts quickly ran out of the research room. Because the passage was too small, Obadiah chose to make a hole in his head. Looking at the 45% energy in the lower right corner of the screen, a trace of determination flashed in Tony Stark's eyes. He decided to defeat Obadiah with a thunderous gesture. If he got into a protracted war, he would definitely lose. The old arc reactor couldn't support him to fight for a long time. Looking at the Area 16 not far away, Stark dialed Potts's phone, and just as he calmed down the other party's emotions, he saw a 5-meter-high mech breaking through. The ground appears before Potts. Obadiah. Looking at the machine gun slowly raised by the other party, Tony Stark roared to attract the other party's attention and slammed into the other party at full speed, and the two rolled to the side street together. Obadiah punched a car away, stood up, grabbed another car and raised it in the air. The 3 people in the car screamed. "Put them down! Obadiah! I like this armor! Woe to them, Tony!" Obadiah held the car and slowly approached Stark, ready to use this as a weapon to smash the opponent to death. Stark gathered energy to his chest, and a crimson energy beam knocked Obadiah into the air. She took 2 steps forward to lift up the car and just put them down. The female driver in the car yelled and stepped on the gas pedal. Her car might not be able to hit that big guy just now, but she is still very good at this thing that is several sizes smaller. Confidence. The car ran over Tony Stark, and Obadiah jumped in front of Tony, grabbed a motorcycle that was trying to escape, and smashed it hard on him. "Well done! Beat this tsundere to death!" Yehu stood on a distant building, holding a Coke in the air with his right hand and shouting loudly. Just as he was about to reach out and grab a handful of popcorn, he saw Jessica put in the last popcorn in the mouth. "Wow! Boss, look at them flying into the sky!" Jessica pointed at the 2 white lines in the night sky and shouted excitedly. Yehu drank the Coke glumly, feeling 60% less happy and decided not to do it next time. Bringing the other person out is a waste of popcorn. Obadiah increased the energy supply and quickly caught up with Stark, who was low on energy. He held his petite body in his hands and said in a low voice, "Tony, my mecha is very advanced in every aspect." "Oh? Then how did you solve the problem of surface ice?" "Ice on the surface," Obadiah repeated with some confusion. Then the power of the mecha was suddenly cut off. Stark punched the giant mecha in the head and said in a low voice, "You'd better go and study it." Bar. The energy remaining is 2% and the backup energy has been activated. Stark staggered and fell downwards. Yehu picked up the last cup of Coke and turned towards the stairs. "Let's go, Jessica, there's nothing good to see anymore." When the 2 of them walked from the 19th floor to the 1st floor, they saw a light blue light beam shooting straight into the sky. Yehu looked at Coulson across the street, who was dressed in tatters, and the corners of his mouth raised slightly. Early the next morning, Stark enjoyed Potts' makeup and looked at the description of yesterday's battle in the newspaper in his hand and said softly, "Iron Man? The name is very catchy and I like it. But strictly speaking, it is made of titanium alloy." "Yes. But no matter what, the name is still pretty good." Chapter 20 I Am Iron Man. Potts rolled her eyes and carefully put on makeup for the other person. She was desperate when facing the machine gun last night, but when Stark rushed towards her in the mecha, she understood that the other person was the person in her heart. "This is your excuse." Coulson smiled and handed a manuscript to Stark and said softly, "You were on the yacht at the time and we made customs documents to prove that you had been on Avalon Island last night. And I got 50 people to give you a statement." Tony reached out to take the manuscript and said in a frivolous tone, "I thought I was with Potts last night." Potts blanked out angrily. He sorted out the other party's agreement with a glance, and Coulson reminded again when he saw this, "Just read it as you want." "Agent Coulson." Potts stopped Coulson who was about to leave and said in a low voice, "I would like to express my sincere gratitude for everything you have done." Coulson smiled and nodded and said softly, "It's just my job. Please contact me later." After watching the other person leave, Potts picked up Stark's coat and put it on for the other person, carefully smoothing the wrinkles on it. Stark whispered, "How did you feel about that night?" "That night?" Potts raised his head and said with a serious face, "Are you talking about that night when we danced together and then went to the balcony to relax, and you went down to get me a drink, and then left me there alone?" Stark's face froze. He had forgotten about it unless the other party mentioned it. He felt that he had underestimated the other party's memory. He took the draft prepared by Coulson for him and stood on the podium and said in a deep voice, "I am Iron Man." The reporters stood up one after another and recorded this moment with their cameras. At the same time, Yehu also stood in front of the TV and whispered, "I am a rich man." With the end of the press conference, Stark Industries' stock rose rapidly like a rocket, and Yehu's wealth also rose at will. The stocks that were originally worth $1 billion have now doubled tenfold. Facing the sudden wealth, Yehu's eyes flashed with excitement. Jessica slowly opened the door and walked up to Yehu with a stack of bills on her cell phone. "What is it?" Yehu took it and looked at it before roaring, "Is this detective agency of yours losing money or making money? Let you check." "An affair, you actually smashed up the hotel room. That scumbag from Boss is so hateful. I accidentally used too much force." Jessica lowered her head and did not dare to look into Yehu's eyes. She knew that the other party had made a lot of money, like this, which cost hundreds of thousands. The compensation should not be taken to heart, isn't it just a small problem of being scolded? It's hopeless. Let's wait for death. Say goodbye. Looking at Yehu's leaving figure, Jessica rushed to eat and hugged Yehu's thigh tightly. Feeling the strength from the mind shield, Yehu raised his brows and understood why the other party took so many tasks but didn't make any money. "Boss, I am loyal to you, do you just have the heart to see me living on the street? I'm very tolerant. Without you, a foodie, my life index can go up several notches." Yehu nodded vigorously. Jessica gritted her teeth and increased her strength with her hands, getting closer and closer to Yehu's calf, and finally stopped. No inch should be made within 5 centimeters. Jessica suppressed her blush and said crisply, "Boss, you can't do this. Last time I saw the show, I even gave you popcorn. There is hard work even if there is no credit." Yehu's face twitched slightly. When he mentioned this, he remembered the scene when he didn't eat a single popcorn. Jessica seemed to also remember the scene that night. A trace of embarrassment flashed on her face. She lowered her head and whispered, "Even if you don't work hard, you are still tired." "Oh, okay, I will solve this matter for you." "Thank you, boss." Jessica let go of her hand with a smile, stood up and sat down next to the sofa. She put her legs on the coffee table and picked up the remote control with her right hand to change the channel. Ahem. Hearing Yehu's cough, Jessica raised her head and looked at the other person's gloomy face. She immediately remembered that she was still guilty, so she quickly put her legs down and the channel changed back to the previous beauty pageant. Yehu showed a satisfied look and slowly sat on the sofa. Jessica immediately went behind the sofa to massage his shoulders. She secretly vowed to hire a maid to massage her when she got rich in the future. "Take this money and pay off the bill." Yehu handed the 2 stacks of Franklins to Jessica with some pain and watched the other party walk out of the door. Jessica walked towards the hotel and passed by an alley when a voice came from inside. "Come. Jessica, I heard that you have a lawsuit on your back. Do you need help?" Matt Murdock walked out of the alley slowly, remembering the other party's profession. Jessica rolled her eyes and whispered, "We have reconciled privately, can you help me lower the compensation amount?" "I can go try." Matt nodded slightly and walked to Jessica and asked in a low voice about the situation at that time. When the two came to the hotel, Matt revealed his identity as a lawyer and had a heated exchange of words. "Reduce the compensation from 120,000 to 60,000. "Hey, Matt, you are so awesome. This will be considered your legal fees." Jessica handed Mark 10,000 yuan, patted him on the shoulder and said softly, "Are you interested in being my personal lawyer? Let's earn boss together." "Money." Matt smiled and shook his head, and said calmly, "I'm helping you because we are friends. You can call me when you need help in the future." Jessica put away the smile on her face, looked Matt up and down, and then smiled again. "Okay, please give me your advice in the future." Jessica subconsciously stretched out her hand and wanted to shake it with the other party. Halfway through the stretch, she suddenly realized that the other party was blind and couldn't see it. Just when Jessica wanted to withdraw her hand, Matt stretched out his right hand and shook her, whispering, "Nice to meet you." Jessica raised her eyebrows. If she hadn't seen him take off his sunglasses, she would have thought that Matt was pretending to be blind. The next day, when Jessica was looking for the lost pet dog, she saw the heroic daredevil. Driven by curiosity, she made contact with him. After some communication, Jessica whispered, "Matt? Is that you?" "What Matt?" Daredevil said a little strangely. Jessica scratched her head when she saw this and said a little embarrassedly, "He is a friend of mine. I'm sorry that your actions are too similar. I can do an exclusive interview for you. What? I want to publicize your deeds." "Whatever." After Matt finished speaking, he ran towards the alley. In the next few days, Jessica would choose some tasks to find pets, and team up with Matt to eliminate violence in Hell's Kitchen. The two became more and more famous. And Jessica's detective agency was soon exposed, and there were countless young people who came to chase stars. For a while, there was a feeling of prosperity. Although they were all small commissions, they also made Jessica happy. For a long time. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.